Are we coming through? Good evening, everyone. It's Thursday, September 8th at 7 p.m. This is a meeting of the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business. It's not to be considered a public community meeting, but there is time for public participation during the meeting as identified within the agenda. Mr. Lyman, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Carpenter?
Here.
Mrs. Dorn?
Here.
Mr. Kinsey?
Present.
Mr. Price?
Here.
Mrs. Anderson?
Here.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Lyman, please give the treasurer's report.
Okay, could I get a motion to approve the minutes from the August 11th and August 25th meetings?
So moved.
Mrs. Dorn,
Second.
Mrs. Anderson. Any adjustments or corrections to the minutes for August 11th and August 25th? All right, Mr. Lyman, please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Can I get a motion to approve the treasurer's report for the month ending August 31st?
We have a motion.
So moved.
Mrs. Anderson,
Second.
Mrs. Dorn.
Just a couple things. One of the interesting revenues we received recently was the state casino revenue, $91,500. We anticipated the last few years, I think I might have mentioned it here, that amount was going to be less because it's a delay of a year or two when we receive the funds. And we thought maybe during the time of COVID that casino revenues would be down. That did not turn out to be the case. Interpret that any way you want to, but it's good for revenue, I guess. We did receive about $300,000 less in fiscal year 22 from our state funding than we anticipated, but
How much again?
about 300,000 less. We normally get around 6 million.
Yeah.
And it was about 5.7. However, we had other areas that were more than anticipated. Federal funding, grants that we received was more, and local revenue was more. We do want to mention before I forget, their financial reports are on the district website if anyone wants to see them. I did want to address one other thing from the blue sheets, and that was that it says that our real estate revenue is 89% of our income. That's so high because we receive real estate payments twice a year. We received one already, and the rest of these percentages will catch up to that. We'll wind up at about 70%, I'm guessing, from real estate, and about 27% from state and federal funding, and the other 3 local miscellaneous funds. So that's about all I have, unless you have any questions about anything that's included in the agenda.
Questions, comments?
Was our state funding lower because of the new formula that we're on?
Because we keep bouncing back and forth between the formula and guarantee, the 2 different ways that they fund schools.
Good question. Thank you. Any others? All right, Mr. Lyman, please call the roll.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes. Motion passes.
Should I get a motion to approve an advance, which is a loan from the general fund for $114,734.64 to cover deficits in 5 federal grant funds? I will explain that once we get a motion on
We
the
have a
floor.
motion.
So moved.
Mrs. Dorn,
Second.
Mr. Kinsey.
Yeah, this is just a bookkeeping balance. The federal government asks for us to spend the money first, so the fund goes into the red, and then we apply for reimbursement. And 3 or 4 weeks later, the reimbursement comes in. They, however, do not want us to end the month in the red, so we have to do this balancing act of advancing money from the general fund if we don't get that reimbursement in time. So it's just a timing issue, and then the money will be paid back when we get reimbursed in the general fund.
Okay.
So it has no effect at all on financial reports at the end of the year.
If I remember correctly, this is a pretty common occurrence every year, most years.
It's actually about every other month.
It's like multiple times.
You know, but we're not allowed to end a month in the red. Sometimes I get that reimbursement in and we're zeroed out. If I can't get it in by the end of the month, they ask that we advance the money from the general fund. I guess the idea is if you have negative balances, you're showing higher general fund balance than you really have sitting there because it's really allocated to those to cover those negative balances. So it's just so I don't get a citation from the auditor.
We prefer not to have those.
I do.
Yes. Any other questions or comments? All right, please call the roll.
Mr. Kinsey,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn.
Yes.
motion passes. For the next component in the superintendent's report, we have our consent agenda items 4A and 4B, which are the certificated licensed staff employment resignation leave of absence for supplemental duties for pupil activity, other, and supplemental duty pupil activity volunteers, and support staff employment and resignations, substitute support staff, and substitute support staff. So through 4A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and B, 1, 2, and 3. Are there any items that board members want us to address individually?
I would note, Lisa Dorn, no relation.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the clarification. Any other questions or comments? All right, we have a motion for our consent agenda items 4A and 4B.
So moved.
Mrs. Dorn,
Second?
Mrs. Anderson. Questions or comments? The opportunity now. All right, then, Mr. Lyman, please call the roll.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey.
Yes.
motion passes. So Dr. Kozad to 4C.
Yep, out-of-state travel, recommend approval of the following out-of-state travel. This is for high school boys baseball for next March during spring break. Again, they're responsible for their own transportation with their parent or guardian down there. They're gonna play, obviously some games, hopefully it'll be good weather, probably much better weather than up here. And so total cost is maximum $100 a player for team meals and activities. This is a normal occurrence pretty much every year, except in COVID year or two, that maybe we didn't go down there, but this is a yearly kind of thing that they go down.
Very nice. All right, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Anderson,
Second.
Mrs. Dorn. Questions or comments? All right, thank you, Dr. Kozad. Mr. Lyman, please call the roll.
Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes,
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes.
motion passes. All right, number 5, reports to the board. We have consideration of the creation of an active shooter response team consisting of school resource officers, private security officers, and/or volunteer district employees. A number of people are going to speak. I'm going to make sure that we move this microphone around so everyone can be heard well. So first, we're going to start with Mr. Price.
Mr. Price.
Yeah, the other Mr. Price, sorry.
Okay, I'm excited.
Good evening, everyone. The safety of our children in the Bellbrook school system is a preeminent concern for our school district. For our children to learn and thrive, they first must be safe. As has been made known to our community over the last several meetings and through correspondence, the district has taken many steps to create a safer environment and recently has taken additional actions to further improve safety. Examples of things the district has done and is doing to enhance safety include the following: modernized school security cameras, upgrades to the visitor entry and building access control system, which, by the way, I actually tried out today. It's pretty impressive the way it works. Student internet monitoring through a software program known as Securely. Hope Squad anti-suicide team. Crisis Prevention Institute training for staff to manage and de-escalate difficult situations and behaviors. Counselors at each school, along with 3 full-time school psychologists. Handle with Care program to help children exposed to adverse experiences. Background checks of employees and volunteers. Busing restoration. Crosswalk improvements. Alert, lockdown, inform, counter, evacuate, or ALICE, certification and training. Building safety plans that are reviewed by local and state authorities. Stop the bleed training. Tip line. Partnership with the Greene County Active Shooter Response Plan Team. And a recent board resolution underscoring the importance of securing firearms and providing information in student handbooks where 3 gun locks can be obtained. It's from our local police department. As can be seen frequently in the news, our nation's schools are a target of evil human beings who would, by choice and with clear intent, harm our precious children in as great of numbers as they possibly can. Preemptive societal efforts, such as providing mental health care, identification of potential threats, and use of our judicial system can only go so far in preventing an unfathomable tragedy such as happened in Uvalde, Texas. While our school system, community, county, and state have taken steps to keep the wolf away from the door, what happens when all that fails and the wolf not only comes to the door, but enters it? No other factor is of higher importance than response time when an active shooter situation develops. Our schools are not and can never become bunkers that can, with 100% effectiveness, repel an attack from a determined active shooter. It is within our power, though, to deter, complicate, and slow down an attack while reducing the time required to respond directly to the active shooter. Throughout our nation, school boards have met and are meeting to discuss what steps, if any, they will take to mitigate and respond to an active shooter threat to their school system. While the risk is remote, the consequences when an event occurs are catastrophic. Unfortunately, it is a near given that in the coming year, there will be school shootings across the nation with tragic loss of life. When that happens, will those school districts that experience this horror be able to say that they did all they practically could have done to prevent these tragedies? The Bellbrook-Sugarcreek school system this evening will ponder what steps can be taken to deter and, if necessary, respond to the active shooter threat to our schools with the goal that all that can practically be done to protect our children will indeed be done. To that end, the following agenda item, I'll reiterate, will now be discussed. Consideration of the creation of an active shooter response team consisting of school resource officers, private security officers, and/or volunteer district employees.
Mr. Kinsey is our legislative liaison. We'll speak a little bit about House Bill 99.
Thank you very much. Just for a couple of minutes, I wanted to give a little bit of history, but then really dive in to what House Bill 99 exactly is, what it permits, what it does not permit. So just for a little bit of history, Ohio as a home rule state always left up to every local school district decisions regarding how to implement their safety plans. And that included authorizing individuals, staff members, to access firearms for the protection of their students. I tried to dig a little bit. I'm not a historian. I could not find it. It's not easily found how long that practice has been going on, but at least 15 years at minimum. So there have been a lot of years, many districts that have been doing that. So if we fast forward a little bit to about a year and a half ago, on June 23rd, 2021, the Ohio Supreme Court, in a split 4-3 decision, affirmed an appellate court decision. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer. However, kind of what it comes down to, and the risk of oversimplifying it, is sections of Ohio Revised Code which were conflating staff who have authorization to access firearms with security personnel, was the phrase of the code. So the Ohio Supreme Court in that ruling said that anybody who has such an authorization needs to be trained up to the same level that any law enforcement officer has, which includes over 700 hours of training, including many, many different subjects. That 700 hours of training, it varies in cost depending which police academy you go to, wherever you're at in the state, through the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy, OPATA. But it can be nearly $10,000 per individual that the schools would have to send them to. It's a full-time gig for over 18 weeks. So that's 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 18 weeks to get an OPATA certification. So that was what the Supreme Court decided. Again, a 4-3 decision, June 23rd, 2021. That put everybody in the state who had a team on pause while they were figuring things out. The legislature got involved and they drafted House Bill 99. That was passed in the Ohio House on November 17th, 2021. So just a few months later, what was that, 5 months later? It then passed the Ohio Senate on June 1st of 2022. And it was signed by Governor DeWine on June 13th of this year, just a few months ago. Since that was signed into law, it goes into effect on September 12th, just in a few days. So that's just a little bit of the history. I'm now going to kind of describe what is in House Bill 99, and apologies because I don't want to screw it up. I'm just going to read a lot of verbatim stuff. A lot of this comes straight from a formal synopsis from the State House. But the General Assembly specifically said when they wrote House Bill 99, they wrote it into the law that the purpose of the provisions therein is to expressly overrule the decision of the Ohio Supreme Court in Gabbard versus Madison Local School District. It creates an Ohio School Safety and Crisis Center and the Ohio Mobile Training Team within the Department of Public Safety. It requires that mobile training team to develop curriculum and provide instruction and training, including firearms training that qualifies a person to go armed in a school safety zone. It permits a school district board to adopt alternate curriculum, instruction, and training with that center's approval for that same purpose. So that curriculum that I described, what it involves is mitigation techniques, communications capabilities, and coordination and collaboration techniques, neutralization of potential threats and active shooters, accountability, reunifications, psychology of critical incidents, de-escalation techniques, crisis intervention, trauma and first aid care, a discussion about the history and pattern of school shootings, tactics of responding to critical incidents in schools, at least 4 hours training in scenario-based or simulated training exercises, and then of course completion of tactical live firearms training and realistic urban training. So that's everything that needs to be approved by the state in regards to training. Per the state, initial instruction of everything I described there may not exceed 24 hours. They're not allowed to impose that. However, any local school board, since local control has been returned here as a whole rule state, a local school board may require additional training on top of that 24 hours that satisfies the state. It requires each district board to provide that center with a current list of the qualified personnel authorized to convey firearms into a school safety zone, but they specifically designate that that list is not a public record. It requires a district board to notify the public by whatever means it regularly communicates with the public if it has authorized one or more persons to go armed within the school. That is House Bill 99.
Thank you, sir.
I have one question.
Sure.
Sorry, I don't know if you know the answer to it.
Follow
That the school crisis training center that has to draft the curriculum and whatnot, have they done so or have they published that yet?
They have not yet.
Okay, we're still waiting on that.
Yes.
Okay.
I've heard that it is imminent, that they've been targeting that September 12th go live date for the law coming into effect, but nothing has been officially published.
Thank you. All right, at this time, we'll address correspondence that board members have received on this particular topic, and we'll go to other correspondence later in the meeting. So any correspondence folks want to talk about that they've received on this topic?
I've received a number of emails about this very agenda item this evening, and people expressing various viewpoints, some of them with assumptions about, what would be the outcome of tonight's discussion. And so therefore, it's kind of hard to respond to those because we're going to obviously have discussion tonight and consideration of potential actions and whatnot. So it's very difficult to respond to emails like that, other than being kind, thanking them for their inputs. And some of them honestly had some very practical, useful, valuable suggestions for school safety. So again, we always appreciate it when we get those correspondences. We really appreciate when people come out and speak to us, whether it's here or at a football game, whatever. It's really appreciated. I did have, I don't know if the other board members got it or not. No one else asked this, so I'm not singling out any correspondence whatsoever. One person said, I cannot be there tonight. Would you read my statement or my email? So I, in respect for this person, and again, being asked that this specifically be read, it's not from the school board meeting, I'd like to read this, so it'd probably be good to have the mic. Again, this is not cherry picking of any of the emails. This is literally one that was specifically asked by the person that sent it for someone on the board to read it because they could not be here in person. She said her name to be used, and her name is Lori Collins. Here's what she said. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend the board meeting due to sports obligations, but I would appreciate if someone could read my statement below. Thank you. My name is Lori Collins, and my family and I moved to Bellbrook in March of 2021. My oldest son attended BCI last year and is currently at Bellbrook Middle School. He attended Mad River local schools from kindergarten through 4th grade. I wrote the statement about the proposed safety plan with select staff members being armed inside the schools. Mad River has implemented this for a long time. There is a notice on every door of the school buildings to alert any outside persons that there are armed personnel inside. The staff members do not openly carry or set weapons down. Aside from that notice on the door, you have no idea if this is their protocol. No one knows who these select staff members are or where the firearms are, just that they are securely locked up but accessible to the person who is supposed to be able to get to it if needed. I truly wish this was not the issue that had to be addressed or discussed, but it is. If, God forbid, I ever got the text or call update that there was an active shooter at my son's school, I would feel 10 times better knowing that there were staff members inside the school who wanted and were able to protect themselves and my child, and that all those staff would outnumber a single shooter or even multiple shooters. Of course, I believe these staff members would be voluntary, comfortable, and trained for these situations. I felt more comfortable and at ease sending my child to a school where I knew that these extra measures and precautions were being taken. I wanted to share my experience as a parent that has already spent years in the school district and implemented this plan, and to date has had no negative effects from it. I believe that the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek local school district would benefit greatly from this. In my opinion, it is always better to have more plans and procedures in place and not need them than to need them and have to wonder where they are. Again, this was only being read because it was specifically requested by the person that sent that email to me.
Thank you, sir. I received about four or five emails that shared a number of concerns. And I think those were legitimate questions, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to fully address them this evening. And some support as well, not quite to the extent of what Mr. Price received, but support for moving ahead with at least our investigation of that. So I don't know if others have anything to report or not.
I don't think I received any correspondence that you all weren't copied on. I would say though that without exception, every single email we got, which was not a ton, was not as much as I would have suspected. Certainly not what we all got used to about a year ago. But every single one had, I agreed with 90% of what was in it. You know, every single one expressed concern, even if an email was in support of doing something more, expressed concern of how it was implemented and what that could or should look like. Ones that were emails of concern were not all out. This is preposterous. They were, hey, have you thought through this? Have you thought through this? And I think they were all things that, yes, that's what's on my mind too.
Sure.
So really appreciate everyone's perspective, really appreciate hearing from parents and community members, because it really helps us understand the sentiment in the community a lot better, but also everyone was just super engaged and thoughtful with their correspondence. So thank you.
I received probably the same correspondence as you did. I was very impressed at just how concerned and professional and respectful they were. And I found myself agreeing with a lot of the things that were sent to me. So I just appreciate the public reaching out in a respectful and kind way. With a lot of the things that were concerned, we've addressed a lot of those in our original plans. So I just thank you to everyone who reached out. It's some great ideas.
All right, then going on, we have a speaker to speak to us on the layered approach to active shooter response. And I'll let Lon introduce himself.
Dr. Kozad, board members, thank you for letting me come speak with you tonight. So my name is Lon Etchison. Can everybody hear me back there? Okay, so my name is Lon Etchison. I have an 8th grader here at Bellbrook Middle School. So you could say that I have a vested interest in school safety in the Bellbrook school system. So can we advance that?
Back there. Control is back there.
Gotcha. So a little bit about me and where I'm coming from with this presentation. So I've been in law enforcement in Greene County for 27 years. Currently, I'm a detective sergeant here with an agency in Greene County, and I'm one of our law enforcement trainers in my agency. So I kind of specialize in active shooter training. Over the years, I've been blessed to do a lot of different things, but for the last 10 years, I've been teaching active shooter response to law enforcement. At some point in the last 8 years, I have taught every agency in Greene County active shooter response. In addition to that, I actually was blessed. I was able to help create the statewide program for the single officer response to active threats that is taught throughout the state of Ohio. It is an OPADA program. And there was 24 of us, I believe, that put that program together back in 2012. So over the years, not only in Greene County, but I have trained officers around the state in active shooter response. So majority of my career, 19 years, I spent on the SWAT team. 8 of that as the commander of the SWAT team. So you could say that over the years, I've spent a lot of time planning how we would handle active shooter events. So that's the perspective that I come from. And before I talk about the layered approach to active shooter response, I want to kind of lay the foundation. So the first thing I want to talk about is, hypothetically speaking, if we had an active shooter at the Bellbrook Middle School tomorrow, what would happen? Well, many of you on the board know that we have it's a committee that is, it consists of police, fire, school, mental health, and it is a committee that meets twice a year. We've been doing that for about 8 years. I sit on that committee. And about 8 years ago, I believe, we came out with a countywide protocol that all the schools, police departments, fire departments have kind of signed off on. And I know Bellbrook participates in those because I've been at most of the meetings and I see Bellbrook representatives there quite often. So the protocol was basically we wanted to be on the same page because these events are very chaotic, and especially I'm going to stick to the law enforcement response for right now. We want to be on the same page. So the countywide protocol basically calls for the solo officer response. So like everybody in this room, I was appalled at what happened down in Texas and the police response down there. For me, it really hit home that we need to train our officers a lot better, right? I can say in Greene County, we have a really good training protocol because I've helped with it. But we do have a protocol. So if somebody walks into the school, somehow they get in school, maybe they're a student, and they start shooting, what's going to happen? Well, as soon as the 911 call comes in, basically dispatch is going to, hopefully, theoretically, it's going to go to our dispatch in Xenia, who controls Bellbrook and Sugarcreek Police and Fire. Unfortunately, there are times when we're this close to Centerville, it could jump to Centerville, and then they'd have to transfer the phone call. And that's all about time. How fast are we getting that response put out there? Okay? So the initial response is going to be based on that first 911 call. Well, as soon as that 911 call comes in and they put out, hey, we've got an active shooter at the school, what's going to happen? Well, that is going to get pushed out to every single police agency in Greene County. Basically, what's going to happen is we call it dropping a 99, which means, hey, everybody that can go needs to go. So for my agency, if it happened during school times, we've got 7 different detectives that I would grab as many of them as I could because I'm their boss, and we'd start coming down this way. Okay? All the patrol guys that we could spare would be heading this way. So a couple of years ago, when the Oregon District incident happened, our agency, as well as other agencies in Greene County, we sent officers to Dayton. So you're going to be getting police agencies from all over the Miami Valley that are going to come here. Probably going to have 200 cops here by the end. Okay? But that initial response is going to be the responsibility of Bellbrook and Sugarcreek PD. And how long is it going to take their officers to get here? I don't know. Because it depends on where they're at within their jurisdiction. So Sugarcreek, I live in Sugarcreek. The farthest as the crow flies, if you go south, it's almost 6 miles from here. That's as the crow flies. If they're down there when they respond, how long is it going to take them to get here? Centerville may be here before they are, depending on where Centerville is. Okay? So there is a time lag. Average response time for police across the country is 5 minutes. And I want you to keep that 5-minute figure in mind as we go through here. So one of the things that I think people have a huge misconception about is, well, we're going to get SWAT there. We are. But how long is that going to take? I can tell you, because I've been doing it for a long time, there are only 3 full-time SWAT teams in the state of Ohio. Ohio State Highway Patrol, Cleveland, and Columbus are the only 3 agencies that have full-time SWAT teams. Any other place in the state, if you're lucky, you're going to get 6 to 10 SWAT guys on scene in a half hour, if you're lucky. Okay? So when it comes to active shooter response, what happened in Texas was an anomaly. These incidents don't normally last that long. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So SWAT, they're going to get here and help clean up. But to trust that SWAT's going to be able to take care of this, don't. Because it's not going to happen, for the most part. History has shown us that. So what we have is the initial response from, hopefully, SROs, we'll talk about that in a minute, and the local patrol and detectives that are going to get here as fast as they can. So that's a reality of what's going to happen here in Greene County if something like this, God forbid, it ever happens. Okay, next slide, please. So to lay the foundation of where I'm coming from, I want to go through just a couple of slides and lay the foundation. So in 2019, the FBI released a report, and they did a 20-year review of active shooter incidents from 2000 to 2019. The highlight of this is right here. When you look at all the states, Ohio was ranked number 5 in the total number of active shooter events. The only people that had more than we did was California, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Florida. So this is a reality for Ohio. We've always been ranked high. We've actually dropped a couple. We used to be ranked number 3. So this is a reality that we have to plan for. Next slide, please. Also in 2019, the U.S. Secret Service did an analysis of school attacks. They studied 41 attacks from 2008 to 2017. And here's what they found. These are not my statistics. These are right out of the report. It's online if you want to find it. But they found that about half of those attacks took place when schools had school resource officers in place. Okay? Are school resource officers a deterrent? They are. But how do we gauge that? How do you prove a negative? You can't. What we can show is that half of these attacks took place when there was a school resource officer on scene. And in a couple of those attacks, the school resource officer was attacked at the very beginning to take him out of the equation. Okay? 83% of the attacks ended within 5 minutes. Remember that average response time I mentioned was a 5 minute? These attacks, if you look at them, 83% are over before the first patrol guy outside gets here. Okay, next slide, please.
How many did you say of the SROs that were attacked? Did you have a percentage for that?
It was a smaller percent. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a smaller percent. Their first target was the SRO, but there were a couple in those 41 that they started with the SRO. So other statistics, 51% of the attackers ended the attack themselves. They gave up. They suicided. They ran away. 22% were stopped by non-law enforcement staff members. Most of those were unarmed, and I applaud them for doing that because they're going up against people with guns. 15% were stopped by law enforcement, and there were some others, some were stopped by fellow students and some other things that can't play, but those were the big percentages. Next slide, please. Not a single attack of those 41 was stopped by an outside patrol officer that wasn't already on scene when the shooting started happening. So that is great. We have a great plan in place. But the reality is, all those cops that are coming aren't going to be here in time. Okay? So what do? We've got a plan for what do we have in the school available to stop this attack. Okay? Next slide, please. So let's talk about the threats real quick. And I classify these. These are my terms. I classify them as internal and external. So internal threats are employees and, unfortunately, students. Okay? And historically in school attacks, it's not the employees that do it. It's the students that do it. So those are our internal threats that we have to plan for. External threats are like the Uvalde incident, Sandy Hook. Those are people that really don't have an inside connection to the school anymore. They're not inside when the attack starts. The attack starts outside and they got to get their way in. Okay? So within the internal and external threats, you got two other things to worry about. You have the opportunists. So if you look at the Pulse nightclub down in Orlando a few years ago, many people think that that was a target, that he was targeting the gay community, and that is wrong. He had gone to several incidents around Orlando that night, and picked one that looked like he could get away with it, and it just happened to be the Pulse. So he's an opportunist. I'm going to do something bad. I don't know where I'm going to do it, right? And then you have the planners. The planners are the ones that we really have to worry about. Okay, so two examples of planners that had really good plans. Jonesboro. So Jonesboro happens in 1998. If you don't remember what that is, an 11-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 13-year-old paired up, came up with a really great plan. Okay, they stole a bunch of guns and ammo from a relative. They had it staged outside the school. The older one, was waiting outside. The younger one says, hey, I need to go to the bathroom. When he goes to the bathroom, he pulls the fire alarm, runs outside, joins his partner. Who's all going outside? Everybody. So what happens? That's when the shooting starts. We all know Columbine. So Jonesboro was the year before Columbine. Columbine shocked the nation, right? I was working that day. I was a rookie for my agency, had been there for like 3 months. And I remember watching it that day thinking, how are we going to deal with this? right? So the internal threats that are the planners are the most difficult threats that we need to plan for, because those are the ones that are tough to beat. Next slide, please. So how do these threats challenge any approach to active shooter response? Well, I have trained churches, I've trained, earlier today, I helped with a ALICE presentation at the Greene County Health District, and we trained their staff in active shooter response. But I've trained university, private security, and almost all of the plans out there focus on dealing with that single threat, right? And that's what we normally see. But multiple threats are out there, and we do see them, and those are difficult to counter because now you have more than one bad guy out there. If you look at schools across this county, big, huge schools, they'll have one SRO. If they have a multiple threat, how is one guy supposed to deal with two people that are on opposite sides of the building? You can't. There's no way. Until he takes out one, then he's got to run to the other side. But if it's going on at the same time, there's absolutely no way he can deal with both of those threats. School activities outside normal business hours also create special problems. So if you watch the news within the last couple of months, you saw, not in the last couple of months, last couple of weeks, you may have seen on TV that St. Bridget School had a guy that tried to kidnap a child out of their open house. Okay? Very bold. I can tell you, we're very lucky that he didn't have a firearm because there wasn't anybody there to stop him if he did. That night, I was here at the Bellbrook open house because there was the same night. We didn't have any police presence here that I saw. So what do we do with after-hours events? Because typically, unless the school contracts with the local police departments, you're not going to have an officer presence there. So what I've seen across the years, football games, some basketball games, you'll have an officer contracted to be there. But what about all the other after-hour things that you got going on? Who's there? When you have hundreds of people here for a concert, watching our kids sing over at the high school, who's your security? Okay, so all those things come into play. It challenges any response plan that we have. Next slide, please. So here's what I like to, I've spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, what's the best response? Knowing that for the most part, we have to rely on what's inside that building, and it is readily available to defend our kids, my kid. I'm not going to talk about hardening your facility or educating your staff and students. You guys have already done a great job with that, and I applaud you for that. But I want to talk about school resource officers. I am a huge proponent of school resource officers. My agency has had them. I had one in the high school for at least 15 years. I have seen firsthand the benefit that school resource officers have to a community. So 2 days after Uvalde, I was the day shift supervisor before I went to the detective section, and one of the schools in my district called us, and they had a credible threat for an active shooter that we needed to deal with. And of course, I was the on-duty patrol supervisor, so that fell in my lap, and I helped manage that. And I watched how the school resource officers, we called them because we had a couple of them. We called them and said, hey, come on up here so we can deal with this, right? Because we were trying to figure out, was there a threat inside the school? Were they on the way? And our school resource officers have handled so many different things. You know, you compare those to the private security companies. If private security is what we've got to do to start with, okay, but they will never be as good as a good SRO program, never, okay? Because they have different jobs. School resource officers are there to do a lot more than a private security guard. The last one, which is the most controversial one that I want to talk about tonight, is a volunteer school staff. So what does that mean? Next slide, please. Here's the way I look at it. I am not in favor of telling the employees of the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek school system, hey, anybody who wants to carry a gun can, go through this 24 hours and come carry a gun. I'm not a big fan of that. Okay, I've been training police officers, police cadets, and other people for too many years to think that that's a good approach. There needs to be some, if you guys decide to do this, which I suggest, there's got to be some sort of a good selection process. You can't make people do this. Okay, I've heard other schools are, yeah, we're going to tell people they got to do this. Wrong. Okay, some people are not built to deal with this. You've got to screen people out and make sure that they are the right ones. Okay, I can tell you, and I could spend hours telling you, and we saw it down at Uvalde, that cops, police agencies missed the mark with this selection process quite a bit. Okay, so whatever mechanism you guys would come up with, I would suggest you have a very good selection process for how are we going to select these people, if that's something you decide to do. The initial training. So the state says you got to have 24 hours. And then every year after that, 8 hours. I've never been a fan of minimums. I like to go beyond. And in my agency, that's what we do. We go beyond the minimum, right? So for me, I would encourage you, if you decide to have a volunteer staff that are allowed to have access to guns, that you go beyond the minimums. Now let's talk about where they're going to keep their guns. I'm not a fan of having teachers in the classrooms carry the guns either. Okay, because I can tell you, you have, their main focus is what? Taking care of their kids and teaching their kids. So having a gun on them, some schools are doing it. I personally am not a fan of that concept. There are other concepts that you can look into that deal with, okay, we have an armed component, but it doesn't involve the guns on somebody's hip in a classroom, because I'm not a fan of that. I want to put training in perspective. The minimum's 24 hours. So earlier this year, I spent 6 months as the commander at the Greene County Career Center. I do not speak for them, by the way. I'm here as a private citizen, not for them. But I spent 6 months as the commander of their police academy on a part-time basis. So I have a really good grasp of what basic police training is, because I teach a lot of it. So let me give you a breakdown of basic police training. So 740 hours is the minimum that they have to have. Now you can have more, you just can't have less. Of that 740 hours, most of it is very mundane stuff that actually has nothing to do with how to deal with a critical threat, whether it's an active shooter or anything else. So for the firearms program in the Basic Academy, it's only 60 hours long. Of that, part of that includes shotgun. So if you were to look at how much time they're actually shooting a pistol, you're in the 40-some hours, okay?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again? What, 40 hours?
Yeah, so if you look at, they have to do 60 hours of firearms, and that block consists of handgun and shotgun, right? So within that block, they have to do at least 48 hours on the range. 12 of it can be classroom, to teach them about guns, because a lot of cops nowadays come to the academy and they've never shot before. So you got to spend time teaching them about guns. So 48 hours actually has to be on the range shooting, okay? Of that 48 hours, some of that is going to be the shotgun. So you're probably looking at 40 to 42 hours of actual working with their pistol. They're only required to shoot 750 rounds in that 60 hours. That's state minimum. You can do more, you can't do less.
And I'm sorry, is that Greene County?
That is state. That is the Ohio Peace
average?
Officer Training Council mandates that.
So everybody across the state.
Everybody across the state, every police academy, and there's 60-some academies, I believe, have to follow those. Like I said, they can do more, they can't do less.
I think, one thing that's been somewhat, misreported was that House Bill 99, was reducing what was interpreted to be firearms training from 700 down to a maximum of 24. So I think, obviously, you are, perfectly equipped to really tell us what that training consists of. So I think, for those that are concerned about the amount of training that's required, and it's not 700, well, neither are the police getting 700 hours of firearms training. I'm sure it's like Miranda rights, how to de-escalate, how to arrest, how to handcuff, how to whatever, how to drive fast, and be safe, and whatever. There's a whole bunch of things there. And a lot of it things can be focused on the law itself,
Correct.
And so I think it's been mischaracterized by media, by individuals, and not necessarily maliciously at all. It could just be a lack. Who's taking the time to talk to people like you to really understand the nature of the training? And I venture to say not many, because this is the first time I've talked to you about this question. So I have no idea, until I've learned this recently, so.
So it would shock you when I say this, 740 hours, less than 1% of that is spent on use of force law. 6 hours is what they get in police academy. And I know that because I teach it and I've taught it for years.
Yeah.
Now we can do more, but they're only required to have 6 hours of classroom on use of force law. And that includes deadly force, less lethal, all those different things, getting sued because you were driving like a fool. All those things are covered under civil liability and use of force. 6 hours. Okay?
I'm sorry to keep interrupting you.
No, go for it.
It's a great opportunity, stuff I don't know. Could you talk a little bit, I'm ignorant, what is state minimum for every department's requalification, retraining every year? How many hours do they have to put in every year?
It is not an hour. There's no set, hey, you got to spend this many hours qualifying. You have to qualify every 12 months.
On the weapon. Qualify as a police officer, or qualify on your weapon.
As a police officer, every year I have to do an annual requalification for whatever firearm I'm using. Okay? So for my agency, it's rifle, pistol, shotgun, 40 millimeter less lethal launcher. We've got to go out and qualify. I can do all of that in a half hour. That's all the state requires. Now, this year, the state has required us to do 24 hours of continuing professional training. None of that requires us to go out and actually do hands-on stuff. We can do it by watching 24 hours of video. But that is required for every police officer in the state of Ohio this year. If you don't do that this year, you lose your certification, basically. Okay? So when people say, they got 740 hours of training, well, you got 60 hours of firearms, you have 6 hours of use of force, civil liability law. Building searches is a 12-hour block. There is not a state-mandated active shooter block by itself. Active shooter is covered within the building search, and building searches only covers 12 hours. Okay? They spend more time learning driving, field sobriety tests. Field sobriety test, I believe, is 40 hours. Okay? So where do all these mandates come from? I would imagine that some of these are federal guidelines. Hey, you got to have this if you're going to get funding. But I don't know that for sure. I do know they spend more hours doing other things than the hands-on stuff. Okay, so when you actually look at how many hours police get in the basic police academy that they are required to have, 60 hours firearms, 6 hours civil liability use of force. There is a block that's like defensive tactics. That's 70 hours. The rest is all legal stuff, traffic crash investigation. There is 24 hours, I believe, of crisis intervention techniques, right? So there are some other things, but a majority of it is procedural stuff that really doesn't help us with a critical incident. Okay, so that's a basic police academy. One of the things that people either conveniently forget or they ignore is that there's actually a class of people that are allowed to carry all across the state. They can carry into a school safety zone, and they don't have 740 hours of training. They have 40, and that is a court officer basic graduate. So court officers, parole officers, bailiffs, court security guys, probation officers, they're only required to have a 40-hour handgun class. And I know that because I teach them. I have one coming up in 2 weeks. Okay? After they go through that 40-hour class, which of that 40 hours, we have to spend 32 hours on the range. We can do 8 in the classroom. They, too, have to shoot 750 rounds. They can carry a gun anywhere in the state of Ohio so long as their agency allows them. The judge allows them to, basically. Okay? So if you had a juvenile probation officer coming here to the school to look in, maybe arrest one of the kids because they got a probation warrant, what are they coming in with legally? Firearm. And they've got 40 hours of firearms training. Now, they do some other stuff that is optional, but they don't have to have that before they can carry a gun. Okay? So, I'm a member of the FOP, And the FOP likes to say, the people that we're talking about arming aren't trained enough. Well, I can say this. The FOP does not speak for every FOP member. Okay, they like to say they do. I have never been asked my opinion by the FOP about what this law was. And I can tell you that I've been up at the State House and I have testified against what the FOP is recommending because they don't speak for all of us, even though they say they do. So they conveniently forget that there's this 40-hour group out there. So for me, when you look at all of this, what is the best for our kids? My kid, I think it's the layered approach. School resource officers are great. What happens if they get taken out at the very beginning of the assault? What happens? Well, we wait. We wait for the cops to get here, and chances are it's going to be over and done with by the time they do. Or some unarmed staff member is going to try to deal with it. Hopefully they survive the incident. So for me, like I said, I've spent many hours thinking about this. What's the best approach? Having a vetted process for deciding, okay, these are the people that we're going to allow to have access to firearms if they need them. To me, that is the best approach because that is here inside the school on a daily basis. Hopefully the SRO is here every day. But I can tell you, because I know this, because it came up, SROs miss days because they're sick, they have to go to court, they've got to go to training. Okay, it's not uncommon for an SRO not to be in the school. How do you deal with that? Now, that can be worked out contractually with the local police department, but I can tell you, my agency, there are some days where the SROs are gone for all day or part of the day. And then we rely on the rest of the guys working the street because there is no other way. So I thank you for letting me talk to you, and I would be glad to answer any other questions that you have.
Does your agency have an SRO in every building?
We do not. We do not.
Maybe this is an unanswerable question, but is that a typical recommendation to have an SRO in every building? Or is it more important in some buildings based on age more than others?
Every school facility, in my opinion, should have an SRO if you can fund it. Problem is the funding.
Right.
So I know because my agency, we funded it on our own for 15 years before the school started paying anything. And it got to a point where we weren't able to do that anymore. And nowadays, they've changed the law, and I think you actually have to enter into a contract. I don't know all the ins and outs of that. But yeah, having one in every school is optimal if you can afford it.
Budget, you really can't say aside, but just 5 seconds here. If budget wasn't an issue, would you want just one SRO in a school of 800 kids? Or
So if budget wasn't not an issue, I'd want a SWAT team at every school. Okay, I would follow the Israeli methods of securing their schools because the Israelis take their school security extremely serious, and I would follow that method. Nothing is more precious than our kids, but yet we don't protect them like that. We protect our gold and our politicians more than we do our kids, and to me
I guess
that's
what I was
wrong.
asking though is there some ratio of students to SROs? Is there any formula like that? Like
Not that I've seen.
SRO per 200 or?
Not that I've seen. Ideally you would have more than one if you could, because like I said, if he gets taken out initially, there's no backup plan to that. We as police always like to work as a team. One guy's really not a team. That could be a situation where if you did have a volunteer school staff, they could partner up with that SRO. And my recommendation would be the SROs and the school, the volunteers, they train together on a regular basis so that everybody knows what's going on. There are no surprises because they're going to rely on each other. The SRO should know somebody's got his back, and they should train together on a regular basis.
I can offer, I came across, Kevin, a number in a study that I read, and I won't get it exactly right, but this is close. And obviously it based on floor plans and geographically, how are the wings spread out, all that thing. But as a very, very, very simple rule of thumb, it was something like for every 85 people, you should have one SRO. Now that's gold standard, ideal, if money were no object. Yeah, so at our high school, that would be 4 to 5 people, something like that, right? Just one opinion I came across.
It'd be like 8 to 10.
But just a very, very simple rule of thumb I came across. It was something like that. It was less than 100, but a high number.
So is number of people more important than real estate that you have to cover?
Say that one more time for me,
Is
please.
the number of people within the building more important as for the ratio than the amount of real estate that you have to cover, the amount of space?
You know, I don't know if that's an easy question to answer, because all the schools are laid out differently. So I'm
Yeah.
not sure that I can answer that one. I wouldn't even try to
Okay.
answer that one. I'd step outside my lane if I did.
Okay,
Having more than one is critical for me.
sure. I see that.
Can you further
Having-
clarify or? Okay.
Having one is critical, right?
Absolutely. More than one is much better.
But at least one, you're of the opinion.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
You dig a little deeper on the SRO versus school security officer.
Sure.
Both of them are carrying.
Mhm.
What's the difference?
Okay.
You know, of those
So,
two?
School security, they're private security, okay? Number one, I don't think they have arrest powers. They're there to stop bad guy if bad guy tries to come in and start shooting people. The school security guys that I've seen, they're basically going to be like, okay, we're there to stop the mass killing. Everything else, that's on you or the local police. Whereas an SRO, they have arrest powers. You know, they work with the local police on a day-to-day basis. There have been several instances in my agency where we've had somebody call and say, hey, we have a potential threat. We're on the phone with our SROs in the evening. They're working with the school hand in hand in the evening while nobody knows about it, and we've resolved the incident before the next morning. You're not going to get that from a private security guy. Our SROs have a fantastic relationship with the kids in the school. They build relationships. Security could do that, but I don't know if they would, because I don't think you're going to have, you may not have that same guy day after day if you're using a private security. Like I said, it's better than nobody, but if I had the choice between the two, I would always opt for the school resource officer, because you do have a lot more benefits to it than just a security guy.
For districts that have implemented a volunteer response team, I would imagine that discretion of who is part of that team needs to be pretty well unknown as far as who's on the team. How do you manage to help them get all the training without it being really obvious as to who's on there?
So it's interesting you should say that, because I did actually want to offer this. Should you guys decide that, yeah, we're going to go with the volunteer school staff, I am certified to teach almost everything the state requires. I have a vested interest in this, and I would do it for free, so it wouldn't cost taxpayers a dime. But you can do it throughout the summer. Nobody's going to know about it. You know, who pays attention to what the teachers are doing on their summer break? Most people don't. So you could do a lot of your training the 24 hours, or if you go more like I suggest, you do that in the summer, and then Saturdays. You know, it's going to be a commitment. If somebody wants to volunteer, it's going to be a commitment for them. And you can say, oh, we're going to go out Saturday and do it. So, but there are ways to do it without anybody knowing about it.
So you talked about the first 5 minutes. I mean, like in our district, it could be like 5 to 7, 5 to, I mean, you don't know, but 5 minutes is the
national average.
So I hate to get, like, as a person that's been in the classroom, what kind of carnage is done in those 5 minutes? Do you have the facts on that? Like,
Just look.
I mean,
just look around.
Right.
Like some of those incidents. Sandy Hook didn't last very long.
Right.
Most of that was done in less than 5 minutes. You know, it just depends. So part of that goes to what procedures do you have in place to prevent that, right? So for example, if you have an internal threat that has planned this out, let me ask you this, what do you think is the most dangerous time of the day for an active shooter?
arrival, yeah.
Lunch.
Yeah.
Lunch.
Recess.
Okay? How many kids are in that combination room at lunch? How many can you shoot in 5 minutes if there's not a school resource officer or somebody else there? You know, so it's a morbid topic, but we can look at these incidents, and dozen, 20, you know? It just depends on what access they have. If they do it during the day when people are in their classrooms and you have that opportunity to lock down, then your numbers can go down. It just depends on when they decide to actually execute their attack, which in Columbine was, if I remember correctly, was at lunchtime.
The thing that's so stunning to me is just the utter randomness of it, you know. Uvalde, Texas. Last day of school. Middle of nowhere. I went to pilot training, Lubbock, Texas, and that kind of part, there's nothing out in that part of the state, you know. And it's just the randomness of it. It's just, so we can say it's always going to be someplace else, you know.
Bellbrook should know better
Yeah.
than to say
Exactly.
it can be somewhere else.
And
Bellbrook
we're not-
has no excuse.
Exactly, and we're not immune. We're not immune because that happened either. It isn't like it's just your one and done, and nothing
Correct.
that will ever happen again.
So, I don't know, maybe some people don't know this. Columbine could have easily happened in Beaver Creek too,
Really,
because one of the shooters was in a military family and they were based in Beaver Creek.
that's correct. That's right. I remember that.
So had they not moved, if he hadn't got orders to go to Colorado, that could have happened here in Beaver Creek instead of Columbine.
Any ideas as to why Ohio? Any forensic look back at why Ohio is number 5 out of 50?
Not that I've been able to determine. I mean, so you would think that states that have, very heavy gun control laws, this would be less of an occurrence, right? But you look at California, who has some of the most draconian gun laws in the country, but yet they have like twice as many as anybody else. So there's no rhyme or reason to it. We're talking about the stopping the bad things, but there's all these mental health things that have to happen as well if we're really going to solve this problem. But that's outside of what we're talking about. Mental health is huge, right? That's a huge problem, and that's not one that I can solve, or we can solve. That's a much bigger problem.
And that's important for our selection process too, for anybody who's,
Absolutely,
so
absolutely. That should be a component of it.
are there other components that you'd recommend?
So I could tell you, as a police officer, I had to do a psychological evaluation. Now, obviously, they failed because I've been doing this for 27 years. But anyway, but yeah, there's a psychological component that we could go through, right? And when you put people in realistic, and one of the things that the state requires is scenario-based training. Right? They got to do 4 hours. When you put people in scenario-based training, a lot of times it is a wake-up call to, okay, maybe I am not cut out for this. Because not everybody is. They think they are, but you put them in a scenario where they've got to make those life and death decisions in a short time frame. Now, can we train some of that? Yes, but some people, after they go through scenario-based training, they're like, I'm out. I'm done. This is not for me. It's not what I thought it was. And that's critical as well. Now, the state requires that, but constantly doing those to inoculate them to that stress and get them to make good decisions, I think that needs to be a component of whatever program you guys might decide to come up with, if you do.
Craig, we're not the only place you've given this or similar presentations.
I've given a lot of different presentations about active shooter stuff. I've given presentations to the city council where subcommittee of the city council where I work. I've talked about active shooter with a lot of different people, churches, schools, universities.
I asked because I see a lot of members of our township and our city elected officials here, lots and some. And if they are interested, can I assume that you would be willing to speak
Are you volunteering
to
me?
them? I have.
Sure,
Respectfully
absolutely.
requesting,
Absolutely.
if just that we care about to provide you as a resource
Sure.
to them as we continue talks with them in the coming weeks that we have planned.
Absolutely. And I have a very good relationship with both Bellbrook PD and Sugar Creek PD. I've worked with those guys for years. Most of them, I have most of them in my phone. So yeah, absolutely. Anything I can do. Like I said, I have a vested interest, so I will do whatever, within reason, whatever is asked of me if I can.
Other questions, comments?
Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
You're welcome.
Thank you so very
Thank you
much.
for the opportunity.
I appreciate that very much. All right. Yeah, go ahead. At this point, the SEA, the Sugar Creek Education Association, is asked to speak. Thank you, Mrs. Dorn.
Dr. Cozad, board, nice to see you again. It seems like we're coming up here and doing this too frequently. So on Tuesday, I received a notification that this was going to be on the agenda. It was probably around 1:30 or so that I was able to finally touch base with Dr. Cozad because of my schedule. The information went out to the public, 2 hours, 3 hours later probably. So I do feel like, well, I think I'm gonna step back just a second. When I read on the board when it says consideration of the creation, and in a lot of the discussions that I've had with teachers, I've tried to be optimistic about this, that this is up for consideration tonight. But sitting here tonight during this presentation, I have to tell you the truth that I feel that it's very choreographed, and that I'm very concerned that like this decision is being made and without any teacher input whatsoever. And I know people may feel differently, but we are stakeholders in this as much as the community members, the students, and the administration. And I would hope that this is the beginning of a discussion and not the end of it. But I am concerned that that's the case. And I'm not going to lie to you, especially with a presentation that was primarily focused on more fear-mongering, no offense, but that is how I felt that was the aim of that particular presentation. Although it does, obviously, as a teacher, these events take place, and it is always something that resonates with us, that we come in and we're always thinking about those things. But I guess, I wasn't planning on really presenting a lot of information for or against, because I am hoping that we can be included in the discussion to try to determine like what this should look like. But I will say that like when the discussion is like that 5 minutes and the SRO being shot, and I really have a hard time thinking that you're going to have a teacher that's going to have a pistol on them, but no tactical gear, and you're going to expect that teacher to go towards the shooter. That to me just sounds illogical. Like right off the top of my head, I just don't see how that's going to happen, especially when you're talking about people who have their own families or their own children in their classroom that they're supposed to be watching them. I don't really see how that works. And that's just one criticism I have of this idea of arming staff members. Now, obviously, you would be doing it on a volunteer basis, and so that would, reduce the need to consult the SEA. But again, my hope, please, I really am hoping that this decision is not going to be made here tonight, and that we're going to have an opportunity to have a discussion about what this program will look like if it is implemented as such. Obviously, we as teachers care a lot about students. I will tell you that listening to some of that conversation, I've been teaching here in Bellbrook for 25 years, and I'm not going to lie that I hear that and I'm like thinking to myself, am I going to be able to finish my career here? Because I don't know that I am willing to do that in a district that is obviously leaning towards ideology. When we talked about earlier, when you said that the laws were passed this year, it is being passed by an extremely gerrymandered legislature that really has no concern about the minority of people, which, in the state of Ohio, you're talking about like 48% consistently vote Democratic. Those are people that also should have a say in this. And again, my true hope is that we can engage in conversation and not make a decision based upon only your opinions and the opinions that you want to listen to. So I thank you for your time. I appreciate those of you who have reached out to me for conversations, and I am more than willing to continue those conversations. But again, with the timeline of September 12th and the way this meeting's looked, I really hope that we have the chance to talk about it before it's implemented. So.
That's a great question.
Yes, sir.
Is your interest and the SCA's interest an if or a how? So in other words, whether a decision's made, yes or no, or a decision were to be made, yes, your primary interest is in how it would be.
Well, I would think, well, to be honest, and I appreciate your question, Mr. Price, but I recognize that based on our interactions over the last couple of years, to be honest with you, I feel like we have no influence here whatsoever. So, I mean, I'm trying to reach out to you to express that we want to have those conversations and that we hope that we can have those conversations. But I also recognize that you are elected officials and you guys, not to go AP government on you, but you guys cater to the trustee model. I mean, I think that you think that people elected you to do what you think is right. The delegate model would be that you are elected to listen to the people and then do what they want, not just doing what you feel is right. So I'm hoping that that's the case. But as far as your question, I don't know how to answer it other than to say that, I hope that we can have some influence on at least the conversation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
We're going on now to our open communication period. The agenda says that there's a time limit of 15 minutes per subject and 3 minutes per person. We're going to strike the 15 minutes per subject. We still have 3 minutes per person, but we will hear from all the people who are on the list this evening. So we're not going to limit people's topic.
Mr. Carper, how many people are on the list?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9.
I was just debating whether we should take a break or something.
Oh. Yeah, we should. That's a good
I mean,
point.
I don't know about now, but at some point.
Well, it makes. Input?
I'm okay.
It's 30 minutes.
Pardon?
I'm good.
Right.
Probably after that.
Okay, very good. All right then, first, Mr. Price.
Oh, that one, that's correct. I'm not as excited right now, but I appreciate it. Members of the board, I gotta say, my detective brother over here is kind of stolen a lot of my thunder as far as some of the information I was planning on talking about here. I don't want to totally rehash it, and some of the things that Mr. Kinsey has read off is going to apply to some of the things I'm about to talk about. Obviously, active shooters become a very important issue and subject, which I have basically a great deal of experience with. I've authored, evaluated active shooter plans and policies for schools, hospitals, and shopping areas. I've only had just 25 years of experience, not 27, so you got me on that. My experience includes use of force, weapons deployment, sensitive resource security, anti-terrorism, and dynamic entry into high-threat events, among many other skills that make me a subject matter expert. When the Air Force needed to restore confidence and security of our nuclear weapon arsenal, I was on a very short list of experts selected. I've had access to after-action reports that probably most of the law enforcement individuals, even in the room right now, probably haven't had. I'm not going to rehash basically anything you talked about as far as what the state requirements were, but I do find it particularly frustrating that the state has, in my opinion, watered down some of the requirements when it comes to a lot of this training. And the reason I say that is because we talk about training as in minimums, and I think it's important, much like the detective said, not to focus too much on what the minimums are, and I'm going to get into that here in a second. I have a few questions for the board that I want you to, they're rhetorical questions. As we're kind of setting up our plans, I want to keep you to keep a few things in mind. Things like, how are you going to keep a teacher's rounds on target? How are you going to keep a teacher from shooting a student? How are you going to ensure a teacher's weapon doesn't become another tool for a killer? How are you going to stop teachers from becoming more of a target if you were to arm them? How are you going to keep a teacher from directing children into fire? How are you going to keep a dangerous student or former student from learning how to overcome your tactics, techniques, and procedures? What is your plan to prevent suicide by teacher? How are you going to keep a teacher from getting killed by responding police? For a school employee to safely carry a weapon in school requires strict adherence to weapons engagement, tactics, techniques, and procedures, continuous training on weapons retention, weapons employment from a concealed carry stance, routine firing qualifications, which I would recommend to be quarterly, use of force training based on judicially reviewed standards, use of force application exercises, much like what the detective talked about in real-world exercise application, double or triple retention holsters, concealable communications equipment that has access to transmit on police radio frequencies, which, and the reason I say concealable, if we're talking about keeping a teacher from basically showing themselves to be someone that is armed at the time, if this incident happens, they still have to be able to talk to law enforcement when law enforcement arrives, so that they don't turn into a fratricide incident, basically, so they don't get shot. Training on effective radio communications with any local tactics, techniques, procedures, training on breaching barricaded doors, command communication control strategies until police arrival, subject identification procedures, and I can go on, but I'm probably going to go a little over my 3 minutes. I apologize. I'm going to go as fast as I can. In high threat situations where survival becomes the most basic need, adrenaline turns even the simplest task like subject identification from incredibly simple to almost insurmountable at times. Depending on the study of police response involving deadly force, anywhere from 20 to 52% of police rounds in high threat scenarios actually strike the target. The high end I saw was 52. That means 5 of every 10 rounds that don't go into the bad guy go somewhere. Even the experts become victims of their own biology and psychology by way of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As any LEO who has trained the new guy fresh out of the academy with minimum required hours, if they are ready to face the fire, can that individual actually stop a use of force or active shooter incident? This is why the Fraternal Order of the Police, in my opinion, opposed the bill. They opposed it because they knew there was a high probability the firearm carried by the teacher would just become another weapon and more rounds to use on our children. Listen to expert advice. The detective already told you he highly recommends the security officer over arming teachers. I'm telling you, you have a very, very high probability of that teacher getting shot, that weapon being taken, and those rounds being used in children.
Mr. Bryce, would you be willing to share that with us, send it to us electronically?
Absolutely. I had to make a lot of changes to it, but absolutely.
You can scan it.
Unfortunately for me, I know how the parents of Uvalde, Parkland, and Sandy Hook feel. I know what it's like to bury a child you expected to grow up in front of your eyes. I know what it's like when people in charge of your children's safety and welfare fail so miserably that you are left with a lifetime of despair. I feel the pain of the loss of my daughter every single day. I also know who needs to be held responsible if we make a conscious decision to ignore expert advice that will keep this from happening in our school. It starts right here in this room with this body. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Logan, Ashley.
I feel like Logan only had 17 years, so.
Just keep going down.
How many LEOs do we have in here tonight? It's like
a full house, man. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Logan Ashley. Quick background on myself. I am a medically retired federal agent, former police officer out of Charleston, South Carolina, and I was an MP at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. As law enforcement officers and everyone, we always hear the term, it takes a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. That situation, in my opinion, holds merit. However, in the school system, it is dangerous and does not give a thought to the totality of circumstances. In law enforcement, we talk about that a lot, totality of circumstances, everything in whole. Additionally, I don't think this board is wishing to give someone who is an educator the means to deadly force. That's not the goal. The goal is to show a force, to prevent that threat. That's the ultimate goal, right? We want to prevent that threat from happening. However, I feel like this mentality lacks a knowledge of the true surroundings of what we have in our schools. We have young children, teens, and very confused adolescents. I have one right now. He has no idea what the world's like. It's fantastic. My opinion, though, is allowing a non-law enforcement officer to carry a gun introduces a weapon into a situation where it would not have been there to begin with. My opinion varies from different to other people. I do believe, though, it is naive for us to believe that these students aren't going to know who is going to have that firearm, what teacher. Kids talk. They are going to find out. If we have teachers in the classrooms carrying firearms, they're going to know. We also have children who, in these schools, are mentally challenged. We know they have mental health conditions, right? But let me put this to you. We talk about a thing called the reactionary gap. You guys can back me up on this. 21 feet.
21 feet.
21 feet. All it takes is a person from 21 feet to get to me with a weapon to stop me before I can draw and shoot that person. That means in a classroom setting, if I am carrying a firearm, a student can charge me, injure me, disarm me, and take my weapon before I can pull my weapon and discharge it and stop a threat. I have now given someone else a gun. This raises the next concern to me is what's our backdrop? We have a target, right? What's our backdrop behind that target? Other students. When I shoot a round, 50% hit target, 52% aren't going to hit. They're going to either hit another student, or it's going to go through that wall, depending, and hit somebody else. Or it's going to go through that student, depending on what kind of rounds, if the school is going to issue firearms and rounds to students or to teachers we're using, it might go through that student and hit another student. So now we have someone who's deceased and someone else's loved one who is deceased, and that's on that teacher. And they don't have qualified immunity like law enforcement. And they have to deal with that now, of killing someone else's child, or someone else's loved one. Now, people have concerns about active shooters. It's understandable. That's why House Bill 99 was passed, right? We have concerns for our children. We have concerns for our family. If we want more guns and we want to show force, I encourage this board to take a budget, give it to the chief, put more resource officers in our schools. Give highly trained law enforcement officers who have been to APATA, who are trained, who know how to do it. I trained with SRT, Columbus, SRT, OSP. Amazing SRT team, amazing guys. Sorry, sir. Just to say, we need to give our schools the ability and tools to protect themselves. And we need to give them preventative measures, like we talked about, Mr. Price, you talked about preventative measures earlier. We need to give those to them, sir, not weapons to our teachers. Thank you, Mr. Governor.
Thank you very much. Dr. Brenniger.
I don't have experience in law enforcement. I won't stop my years, but I've spent a dozen as a psychologist. I think some of that's relevant, and in more years as a trained scientist. And I tend to talk about evidence a lot when I come up here. I first wanted to thank you for the safe storage resolution that you passed at the last meeting, especially you. Thank you, Kevin. We know that awareness campaigns for the safe storage of firearms greatly reduce the risk of both suicide and school shootings, since the majority of school shooters obtain their weapons from the homes of family or friends. Tonight, I want to voice my strong opposition to arming teachers. Arming teachers is admittedly seductive in an era of school shootings. I think we can all agree that we want to keep our students safe. However, there is no scientific evidence that arming teachers is effective. It actually increases the overall risk. An armed teacher cannot, in a moment of extreme duress and confusion, be expected to transform into a specially trained law enforcement officer. An armed teacher is more likely to shoot a student bystander or be shot by responding law enforcement. Further, we have evidence of over 100 incidents where sanctioned guns were mishandled in schools. From a loaded gun falling out of a teacher's pocket while doing a cartwheel, you can't make this stuff up, to a teacher unintentionally firing a gun in class during a safety demonstration, to guns being accessed by students. Am I alone in these concerns? No. The two largest teacher unions in the US strongly oppose arming teachers. The National Association of School Resource Officers, these SROs we've been talking about, they also stand opposed due to the potential risks to themselves, the school community, and the armed teachers. The Fraternal Order of Police actually opposed the passage of HB 99, which we've already talked about how it greatly reduced the number of training hours to just 24. Lastly, 8 out of 10 teachers oppose arming teachers, 7 out of 10 parents, and 7 out of 10 teens. An overwhelming majority of schools in Ohio are not arming teachers. A sampling of schools that have publicly stated they will not arm teachers: Centerville, Beaver Creek, Miamisburg, Dayton, Columbus, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Akron, Canton, and the list goes on. If arming teachers isn't the answer, well, what is? Well, thankfully, we do have evidence-based practices, many of which Bellbrook is already doing. And I thank you for advertising this. I'm going to run through the quick list. 1, public awareness campaigns about safe storage, check, very recent addition. 2, establish threat assessment teams to identify students of concern, check. 3, implement basic security upgrades, partial check. Some of these are still in progress this year. 4, plan in advance for emergencies. This is also a check. I think the state of Ohio requires this. 5, establish safe and equitable schools to ensure that threat assessment teams aren't having a disproportionate impact on students of color. Unclear if this is being done. 6, increase mental health support. This will help with school shootings. Most school shooters have history with that particular school, and teen suicide, which we know occurs far more frequently than school shootings. You hear me say that a lot. I have asked the board and superintendent for more of this, and thus far have been told no. 7 is my last point. If you insist on having more armed personnel, please make sure they are trained SROs. If the cost is prohibitive, consider a special levy. Arming teachers may be less expensive, but not when there is zero evidence to support its effectiveness. Thank you. And I do have a list of sources I try to base everything I say on data, so thank you.
Thank you. I do have a question for Lon. When organizations have an active shooter response team, do they carry during the day, or
There's a huge disparity. So I know some schools where the teachers are not allowed to carry, they have school administrators that are. So working in an office, I know other schools, there are very few schools that are actually arming staff, even before House Bill 99. I was aware of just very few are arming teachers, and they have different methods of doing so. Like I said, I'm not a fan of having a teacher in a classroom carrying a gun.
Yeah.
But other schools are doing it in different ways. You know, they have the administrators, they have, some are using lock boxes strategically placed. That only certain people know how to get into them. So there's a lot of different ways that you can implement a program if you choose to do that. And that's, for the board and whoever else wants to be in on that to decide. But there are different ways to do it.
I can't imagine a scenario where we would have a staff member who was carrying during the day.
They did it next.
Yeah, and it varies from location to location. From what I've seen over the years and the people that I've talked to.
Okay, thank you. Denise Moore.
Good evening. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. I'm here on behalf of Sugar Creek Cares.
We can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's crazy. I'm a teacher. Despite the well-documented harm of school police and the lack of evidence that policing measures make schools safer, the use of school police and arming staff has drastically increased. This is due to poor evidence-based decision-making on the part of boards. To date, placing armed officers in schools or arming staff has not delivered the results in terms of reducing school gun violence. A study of the U.S. public schools nationwide from 2014 to 2018 showed that while school resource officers reduce school fights, and certainly that's a desirable outcome, they do not prevent gun-related incidents in schools. In fact, a National Institute of Justice funded study of every school shooting, attempted school shooting from 1980 to 2019 in the U.S. through K through 12 schools found that the rate of death in these incidents was 2.83 times greater in schools with armed guards on the scene than those without. Why is Sugar Creek Cares here tonight? Because we think you are proposing school policing by armed guards, that is to say, arming teachers. In these circumstances, our concerns relate to research that shows schools have significantly greater negative impact on students of color, students with disabilities, and other marginalized students. Research has identified conclusive evidence of direct negative impacts of policing on students from historically marginalized groups, including the same group that I just mentioned. The Department of Education Civil Rights Data Collection and Section 618 of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act data consistently demonstrate that student discipline disproportionately involves students of color, particularly Black students, and students with disabilities. These disparities in student discipline begin as early as preschool and are widespread and persistent. The disproportionate treatment of students of color, and this is related to the school officers, school resource officers. The disproportionate treatment of students of color is not due to disproportionate misconduct. This is, in fact, no evidence that higher rates of misbehavior among these students account for the far higher likelihood of their being disciplined by school police compared to their white peers. What in fact is needed are increased resources to support students because most school shootings are performed by students or former students whose needs were unmet. In consideration of the cost of arming teachers, along with liability issues associated with arming teachers, along with the potential danger of arming teachers, the board would be best to invest in greater numbers of school-based mental health providers. These school counselors, social workers, psychologists, and nurses each play a critical role in supporting the youth and addressing barriers to school success. Expanding these services, and here's some statistics that are,
You need to wrap it up.
okay, I will. Here's some statistics that are shocking. The School Social Worker Association recommends a 250 to 1. Ohio, for the counselors, Ohio demonstrates 4,854 to 1 in Ohio schools. What's our rate? What is our rate here? National Association of School Psychiatrists recommends 300 to 700 students to 1 psychologist. The federal data shows disgusting national average of 1,500 students to 1. Ohio schools, 1,084 to 1. What's our district ratio? American Nursing Association, 750 to 1. Ohio is 991 to 1. So there's severe shortages in the area of mental health, and that is the primary reason why we have school shootings, typically. So my suggestion on behalf of Sugar Creek Cares is our leaders, you should pursue an evidence-based intervention plan that address what we know about school gun violence.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Allie Mumpower, did I pronounce that correctly?
It's Mumpower, it's weird, it's German, I don't know.
Okay.
Okay, I married into it. Hello, gotta open my notes here. I'm Allie Mumpower, I'm another law enforcement officer. I've only been on for 6 years, so don't expect me to do any magic tricks. I'm a mother of 2 Bellbrook Golden Eagles, Hattie and Emmett. I'm also a certified firearms instructor, and I'll piggyback on Lon. I'm willing to give you my services for free to train anybody that wants or needs it for the school district. I want to acknowledge this is uncomfortable. No one wants to talk about school shootings. No one wants to talk about arming people and asking people to put their lives at risk for our children. No one wants to talk about it, but that's our reality right now, which is uncomfortable, but it's our reality. I want to talk to you about time, value, and commitment. Time. I think of my 1st and 4th graders sitting at their desk when a threat enters the school. The time it takes for someone to call dispatch, time for dispatch to call units, time for units to respond, time for units to enter, time for units to find the threat, and time for units to stop the threat. Time my 1st and 4th graders are sitting there with a desk and crayons to protect them. I want the fastest possible reaction to put a stop to any threat. I'm a police officer. I know when I hear a critical call come out, especially when it involves children, it's like my brain goes into overdrive and I can only go as fast as my cruiser will take me. And just knowing that it's going to take me at least a few minutes to get to that threat is gut-wrenching to me. So I think of my children waiting 5 minutes for help and it makes me want to throw up. Value. There's value in having teachers who are safely and responsibly armed in our schools. There's value in the deterrent effect. Our children are no longer viewed as sitting ducks. There's value in having committed teachers and staff that can stop a threat quicker than dispatching units to respond to the school. And those teachers would be choosing to do that, choosing to put themselves in harm's way to save their students. Most threats stop immediately when they're confronted. Why not give our kids the best chance to avoid injury and trauma? Commitment. Commitment to training is imperative. This opportunity should be for those who choose to commit themselves to training in order to carry. With proper training, a person can become a safe and proficient shooter. I've had many friends in the non-law enforcement community that I would trust with my children's lives, like shooters in the competitive world that I'm good friends with. I would entrust my children with them and their skill set. Training should include, but is not limited to, safety, marksmanship, attitude, and legal issues. A psychological exam similar to what we law enforcement officers have to go through would be wonderful to put anyone through that would be willing to carry in a school. They have to go through the same psych exam that we do. We can deter threats if we're willing to recognize the value in committing to proper training and allowing teachers and staff to be armed in school. Think about you would consider an acceptable time for your child to sit under a desk and wait for someone to save them. And I imagine my Hattie and my Emmett under a desk waiting. And I don't think 5 minutes is acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Lon Etchison, as a
I
committee.
thought I had to sign in. You can.
Okay,
I said my piece.
all right.
Well, I could talk for another hour.
You have 3 minutes. All right, Andy Kaufman.
I have 2 things I want to talk about. First one's really easy. We need to get funds to get oil on the hinges of that door back there. Second thing, pretty much we've covered it. Safety is paramount. But there's one thing that every speaker here kind of missed, kind of a key word that didn't really come up. I'm actually kind of surprised about that. But before I get to that, I kind of wanted to paint a scenario of things that we do for preventative security to things that we do at our homes versus schools, things that we do at our home. They can be kind of parallel with what we do at schools. You put up lights, you put up motion sensors, you have cameras, you have cameras on your phones, you have a pet. A lot of things we do to secure your home. We do things like that at the school as well. I don't know to what extent, but I won't get into that. But I want to paint a picture of, for a lot of people, singles, I'm just going to point out ladies here, you're at home, you're by yourself, you have your security, you have your cameras, you have your lights. Those are things that are supposed to deter a rational thinking person. Well, that's not really what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with unrational people. Those people will go through the lights, they'll break your locks, they'll go through your dog or pet or whatever you have there for security. And after those preventive measures have failed, what's next? It's you. Whoever is at home, you're next in line. And hopefully you have something, some kind of a weapon. I'm not saying a gun, but if you're in the kitchen, you've got a frying pan. That's a great start. I don't know if anybody's been hit by one of those things, but a sucker hurts. It's not like in the cartoons. Maybe you've got a golf club, maybe you've got a knife in the kitchen, maybe you have a gun, things to equalize, to arm yourself. And in any one of those situations, doesn't matter what weapon or how you're arming yourself, you are the first responder. And I think we can draw a parallel to the schools where whether you are a teacher, a janitor, or some kind of staff, if something happens, somebody gets in past those preventative measures, they are the first responder. And I think that, I'm not promoting guns or whatever, I'm just saying those teachers, those staff are first responders, and they need some method to defend themselves, the students, and so on. And with that said, I kind of wanted to say, there's a lot of outside influence. We just need a solution that fits Bellbrook, not what other schools are doing, because what's good for them does not work for us, and vice versa. So, we can consult whoever we want, but ultimately we know best how to take care of our schools. And the other thing was, a lot of the discussions we say the guy's a shooter or the guy's going to get the training. How about the ladies? The ladies need to be a part of this too. I mean, if we're doing equal rights, so on, whatever you want to call it, the ladies need to be that first responder role and do that. That's it. Thanks.
No problem.
Kevin Martin.
Dr. Cozad, I'll turn off his ringer. Can you get that off?
Do what?
Your ringer in here?
That's a 3 minute, that's a 3 minutes.
You should have explained that, because this whole time I'm thinking, this guy can't turn off the ringer.
No. And it's on a 3 minute cycle.
I appreciate that. Well, I will say 3 minutes, all right?
That's 2 minutes now.
Great. Yeah, how many Bellbrook officers are there, you know? Oh, sure, great. I'm asking, how many, sir, there are 15. There's 15. How many Sugarcreek? 16. Okay, thanks. And how many during the day? Peak hours of the day at any given time? Between 2 and 3. 2 and 3. All right. All I would say is nobody, that is really, everybody's very passionate about this, and we can all have different feelings about guns. That's not your all's job. I just pray you guys will be fearless here. Take care of our babies, however best you feel. I do not believe that you have some intent where you're trying to be reckless with any of this. I believe every one of you, what I know of you, that you'll come up here with a very comprehensive plan and understand that they need enough training where they're going to put rounds on target. I don't know how many hours that takes. I know some of you know, or some of you can find out. I bet Lon knows. So whatever that is, we need to address that. I am Kevin Martin. I do the Weagles program here for the kids. We come in here on any given Saturday and Sunday. They are multiple communities from all over Dayton that are here, and there's no law enforcement. I only had to call twice, I think, last year, the whole year, with parents that got unruly. We've been on national television at Bellbrook with Metro Sports for unruly parents. But all those things, I don't think we're talking about today. What we're talking about is an actual person coming here to harm the children. And last I checked, nobody addressed but one person, 0 attacks, stopped by off-site law enforcement. And what was the other one? The thing that my wife is a teacher and my daughter's a teacher at Pratt Elementary in Kettering, and there is no way they would not lay down their life in any capacity for those kids. I know that. I passionately know that. I've heard their hearts. So why not give them a chance in heck to be able to do something about it and stop it? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Jeremy Price.
Hi, thank you. I'm sorry.
There
are a lot of prices. I agree.
I never knew it until now, so that's the only one.
I appreciate you guys and for what you guys do here. I know it's probably tough. I know for me, this is I'm a father of kids in Bellbrook. This is a pretty tough subject. And it's pretty sad that our world has come to having to even talk about this and plan for this. I haven't heard anybody say that you're putting teachers with guns. I don't have a problem with you putting teachers with guns, to be quite honest with you. I have a problem if you don't plan for that and let people know what that is, if you don't strategize, if you don't find a way to do everything in your power to make them safe with a weapon. I believe what the gentleman just said, that teachers, administrators, parents, these experts, officers, whoever's here to do that, be a part of that, I believe they'll do everything they can to protect the kids. I have 5 kids here. I want them to be protected. And I know that I feel like what this is about is coming up with a plan to do that. I haven't heard anybody say you have a plan or given us what those plans are, but I think we're all looking forward to that. I know there's opposing sides to what's taking place today, and you have a very difficult task ahead of you. There are a lot of experts that spoke here today. I'm no expert. I don't even claim myself to be an expert being a dad with 5 kids, but
It's a hard job.
it is a hard job. But I love my kids dearly, and I know everybody in here loves their kids dearly. And I just want to know that you're going to do everything you can to protect my kids. I had a lot of people put a lot of statistics out there. I had a lot of plans too, but it just seems like I would rather speak from my heart at this point. I just want to know that if you're going to do that, that there's a really big, strong backbone to it, to what it takes to be that expert, if you want to call them that, who is a teacher, an administrator, a school board member, whoever that is that's in these schools. I think an active shooter, statistics tell us it could happen. It could happen more likely than a tornado or a school fire. And we plan for that. We drill for that. And the statistics tell us that an active shooter coming into your school is going to happen more than those things will. I just hope that you'll do what you can to, protect our kids and plan for that. That's all. Thank you.
It's 8:52. We're going to take a 5-minute break so people can stretch their legs, use the restroom, whatever, and we'll reconvene back here in 5 minutes. Yeah, really. So this
Maybe we should explain that.
yeah.
Oh, that would be nice. Oh, yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, our superintendent's a little bit more respectful than
Give a 30-second warning and then.
All right, reconvening. Thank you very much to all of you who spoke. We appreciate your willingness to get up and speak in front of the group. That's usually a fear that people have worse than death. So thank you very much for being willing to speak about the topics, the things that are passionate to you. We really do appreciate that a lot. Going on to new business, is there correspondence from other topics that we want to share? I did not receive any correspondence on other topics. So does anyone?
As I've been in the village open houses, I did have a few parents ask about the computer service fee that was added to student fees. They were under the impression that those were waived this year because of our grants. So if Dr. Kazak can maybe answer that a little bit, there was some confusion, at least 3 parents that came up and asked about it. So.
Yep, so the Chromebook fee was from grade 6 through 12 in the past. That fee is waived because we received the grant for on the computer. The computer service fee is not waived. That is progress book and other services. That's something different than the Chromebook fee. The Chromebook fee is not on there. So
right, yeah, it's not on there.
Correct.
The computer service fees.
Yeah, it's different.
It's the programs that we use.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, anything else? All right. Is there any other items for information or discussion?
Other than the topic. Other than topic.
Other than, no. And so we're now to new business, so. Anything else?
I feel like we need to have a discussion about this topic.
Okay. Well, I appreciated Mr. Etchison's presentation very much. Probably have a gazillion questions, going through, when we start through the particulars, if that's where we want to go, then we'll want to be tapping into you as a resource for a whole variety of questions. What are people's general impressions? I know that people have spoken very passionately about the need to be safe, and then those who are very concerned that we're making it less safe by having armed personnel inside the building. And I think that probably a lot of that is related to how it looks, how it gets implemented. Because certainly some of the concerns that were raised to me about an individual carrying on a regular basis in the building, that does seem like very vulnerable spots, which is why I had the question about how is that usually presented, in an organization, school or otherwise, if somebody carries on a regular basis, or are they, have a firearm accessible in some locked location that only certain people know, or certain people can, even open, that kind of stuff. That having them generally available seems to be a big concern from my perspective.
What struck me from this presentation, and honestly, it's what my own brain here, that, it has been, like, as long as I've been thinking about this, many years, 6 kids once, that how do you approach this? Education and training.
Yeah.
Infrastructure. Thirdly, FROs, which is that. Fourthly, the consideration of a volunteer team. But I'd like to just really make it clear that I am, as strongly as I can express it, I want to see an SRO in each of our schools.
I do too.
It will cost us. I don't know how much. I'm just going to make a number up here. Let's just say it's $100,000 per person. I don't know what exactly. But okay, so that's 4 people. That's $400,000. We have roughly a $34 million budget. If we just do some, just easy rounding here, we're talking about roughly $1 out of 100 to put an SRO in our schools. And we heard, I heard well, I understand very well what your follow-up was. That is, the person is targeted, understood. But what we can't measure, how many people have been deterred, by having that in front of them. So it's kind of hard to measure the negative. And so I cannot, in light of what we've seen happening like wildfire, especially last year, throughout the decade before as well, but especially in the last year, especially what happened in Baltimore, that if you have a very visible presence there, SROs, that is always there, but unfortunately, what you said, they're not always there. They get sick, they've got new training, they get delayed, they have various things, or they're in the wrong part of the building, or whatever. But regardless, to me, it is beyond imagination. In my perspective, I'm not speaking to the board here, right? That we would not dedicate that $1 out of 100, roughly, that would be required to provide SROs in all of our schools full time. I am so grateful to Sugarcreek Township that they have an SRO that says here in our high school, and that's what I see. I run my kids to school. That's what I've seen for years here. My kids went to high school. I'm so appreciative of seeing a police car there and knowing we're bouncing back and forth through certain times of the day between the middle school and the high school. God bless you. Thank you for doing that. And I know that there's an element of financial support coming from Sugarcreek Township to enable that. And so I'm really, really appreciative of that. And, we don't know, but, obviously the community, the whole experience was very quick event a few years ago. And for all we know, the NSR was sitting there deterred what could have taken place there, which is downtown Dayton. Just put it bluntly. We don't know. And so my position is we have to do SROs. And we dedicate $1 out of 100. But in fairness, it's not like we have discretionary $1 out of 100. We're using 85, 90% of that, to pay our bills, to pay our teachers, to pay our staff. So we've got some surplus that we will get into over the years. And it's been very difficult to educate our community. But yes, in the state of Ohio, we have to come back on a recurring basis for levies. So okay, at some point we're going to have to come back for a levy. At some point, who knows, years down the road, hopefully. But if we have to come back a year earlier because we funded SROs, my God, And we'll never know, right? Nothing ever happens. We'll say, well, maybe it wasn't necessary. But we won't know, But if something happens and we don't, that's what I was trying to say in my opening statement, because I myself wrote, I don't want to be one of those school boards that something horrific happens and we look back and go, oh, we thought it was going to happen someplace else, and we didn't do something because we thought it was going to happen someplace else. I don't want to be there. If something happens, I want to rest well knowing at least I did what I thought, that was most effective to protect our precious children. So whether we team up with the township or the city, because we've got different schools and 2 schools in each, right? And look to some, additional funding, because obviously our community is very sensitive to the levy issues and funding for schools and all that. So if we could somehow realize the benefit from the township or from the city that would make it exclusively a direct bill to the schools, that would be very advantageous. I know next week we're having a community meeting with the townships and Bellbrook City, where we can discuss this. I think we should discuss that. I do not think schools should sign up for funding exclusively right now with an SRO until we know what's possible from our community partners. But I am just, like I said, emphatic that we need to do SROs for each of our schools. And I understand it's not the be-all, end-all solution, as you pointed out, but we don't know what's been prevented by having those SROs there. And to me, it's pretty obvious to see the police walking around in there. It probably gives you pause before you think those people think, evil people, how they think. They probably choose to go elsewhere. That's my position on SRO. Obviously, there's one other topic here to discuss, but that's how I feel about it.
Yeah. And just for a point of information, the meeting is a week from Monday with the township and the city park district, and we can bring that up as one of our topics.
Is that still at the small little township office where we're going to find three different offices of government, everyone's half the size?
That's the schedule right now, I believe. Is it
I
still?
don't understand that. I don't know why we should have it as a minimum in this room, but better yet, we invite, the whole community. We've got our three different branches of government here. We got an awesome forum there in the cafeteria.
Yes, we do.
So I don't understand why we have it out there. So,
It's the township's turn to host, and they have decided they have a work session that night and a meeting, and they want it there.
well, we agree to go, right? I mean, we agree not to go.
We'll go, thank you.
We'll plan to go.
I just think it's a lost opportunity. We've had a pretty darn good turnout tonight, based on how the discussion evolves over the night. There may be more people want to show up next week. I can't remember how big everyone is, but it's half of those. I just think it's
bigger.
Is it? I don't know, Carol. What is it?
It's bigger than this. It's at least as big as this. I think it's probably this one.
Is it okay? Well,
Yeah.
all right.
Very good.
I mean, I'll piggyback. I'm sorry. I'm good. Okay. I also would absolutely love to find a way, any way possible, we can get an SRO
In every building.
We've received briefings in executive session regarding what the cost would look like for that in the school and for everything. We also received a really excellent briefing by, God bless the man who's doing great work as a private security company, briefed us what that would look like, gave us information about the cost of that. I'll just put all my cards on the table. Cost concern. The costs are concerning, considering it's a very large, recurring, unbudgeted expense. Now, I think we can overcome it. I think, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot because I get it. The city has budget constraints, the township has budget constraints, but maybe if people would be willing to put our heads together and try to figure out all of the possible options, good ones and bad ones, thinking outside the box, if there's any way that we can work together, because people who live in the city, people who live in the township have a vested interest in having safe schools. So I would love to continue that conversation. And maybe it's not possible. Maybe there's no cost share. I don't know. But try to just make sure that we check every single box, overturn every single stone to see if there's any way that we might be able to work together in some capacity to get an armed SRO. I would love to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely would like to keep it with the SROs. I appreciate the security update that we got from the security company, but I don't feel like they're a vested interest in our community. They don't form our relationships with our students as well, and I just would like to keep everything local. I mean, and yeah, we cheered on the Sugarcreek Police Department. Thank you so much for what you do, but every day when I'm driving the road around, I see Chief Carmen out there giving high fives, fist bumps to our little kids in Stevensville. And so the work is going on both ends. We are being so well supported by our police department, and I would like to keep our funds. If we're going to spend money, which I'm extremely concerned about doing that, but if that's what we need to do, I want to keep it local with people who are invested in our community.
Let me just say this, I wasn't trying to short you change. Well, I just don't over there, so I don't see it.
9 times out of 10,
I love you. Keep it up.
So I'm looking forward to that September 19th meeting. Hopefully the public can come.
Can come? Yep.
We can put our heads together and get a conversation going. If it takes some time, just to see what's available and what's not. I look forward to that conversation. On the other topic that's kind of been discussed tonight, I don't know if anybody came prepared to make a motion. I did. I put together what just my own personal thoughts, what I believe would be a good starting point and a good framework for putting something in place. This is a starting point. This begins the conversation. It does not implement anything. It just is the first step. So I would like to make a motion, and I have copies here. I'm going to pass out to everybody. Apologies, everybody. I've been making a lot of notes as we've been hearing from community members, also from Sergeant Etchison. So I made some edits to my draft that you're not going to see in here. but this is most of it to help you follow along. So this is my personal proposal. It's kind of long. Apologies. It's really long. I wanted it to be comprehensive. And actually, let me start with that before this. That in talking with subject matter experts and reading literature, looking at evidence, experts seem to agree that a comprehensive approach is really warranted. That if you're too heavy in just one area, say you put all your eggs in the basket of hardening your building, which we've done a lot of. We have now funded brand new state-of-the-art camera systems, window film to prevent entry in sensitive areas, door sensors, all these kinds of things. Which you can. If you do all of that and you totally do mental health, you're missing the mark. You need to have a comprehensive, well-balanced, multi-layered approach. One school safety plan that I received access to from a subject matter expert, he's down in the Texas area. I really liked it, and that started my own thinking. And he broke up the entire school safety problem into 4 areas: deter, deny, detect, and defeat. So here's my proposal, just as a start. Whereas the safety of our community's children is the only responsibility entrusted to the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek School District, more important than their academic growth. Whereas the issue of school safety necessitates a comprehensive, balanced, and layered action plan that will deter, detect, deny, and defeat any deadly threat to our students or staff. And whereas members of the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education have consulted with and received guidance from national and local subject matter experts, including the City of Bellbrook Police Department, the Sugar Creek Township Police Department, the Greene County Sheriff's Office, and officers who have served with the Greene County SWAT and the Greene County Career Center Police Academy. Be it resolved that the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education directs the administration to ensure our school safety plans and procedures are comprehensive and balanced in deterring, detecting, denying, and defeating anyone who is a deadly threat to our students or staff. Be it further resolved that the Board of Education supports and encourages a comprehensive array of safety measures, including but not limited to, quick timeout, apologies. I didn't realize you were going to make a list of things in your opening remarks, so maybe we can go to anything I don't have here, and we might want to amend. Okay, I'm back in. Be it further resolved that the Board of Education supports and encourages a comprehensive array of safety measures, including but not limited to technology that monitors usage of district devices and alerts administrators to warning signs of suicide or other violence. De-escalation training from the Crisis Prevention Institute, which teaches best practices for nonviolent crisis intervention for managing difficult situations and disruptive behaviors. Raising awareness of the Ohio School Center tip line, where students can report any troubling activity that they observe. School Hope Squads, whose goal is to prevent suicide and violence through public awareness and education, reduce stigma, and serve as a resource to those touched by suicide. The Handle with Care program, which is aimed at addressing the negative impact of children's exposure to adverse experiences, violence, and trauma. The Handle with Care program directly addresses the goal of mitigating negative impacts of exposure to adverse experiences by providing support and on-site trauma-focused interventions by school staff and or mental health providers, if necessary, to children identified by local first responders and school personnel. Support for additional training for staff to detect warning signs of self-harm attempts, suicide, and violence so they can direct individuals to the help they need. Multiple other mental health services both within our district and through strategic external partnerships. Support for additional training for staff to effectively respond during an active shooting. Increasing communication opportunities to facilitate information sharing between the administration and local law enforcement. Raising awareness of the importance of responsible ownership of firearms and informing our school community through student handbooks that free gun locks are available to all at the City of Bellbrook and Sugar Creek Township Police Departments. Regularly auditing and upgrading physical security policies and measures such as but not limited to every access point remaining locked except for designated monitored frequencies. Sensors that will alert administration of the strategically designated doors prompted against policy. Window glass film installed in strategic areas to prevent unauthorized access to our buildings. New state-of-the-art security cameras with instant remote access for law enforcement. Robust barricade and door lock mechanisms for all classrooms. Comprehensive visitor management policies that include equipment to conduct instant, near real-time background checks for visitors. Whereas, the response time of a trained, capable responder is a critical factor in saving lives once an active shooting begins. Whereas the Board of Education recognizes the unavoidable delay and unacceptable resultant casualty count involved with the cumulative time it takes for someone to recognize that an active shooting has begun, dial 911, inform dispatch of the situation, have that information relayed to off-site law enforcement officers, who then begin traveling toward our schools so they can ultimately arrive and begin their search and response protocols. Whereas the Board of Education will be as transparent as possible while recognizing the necessity of protecting the confidentiality and operational security of some details of our school safety plan to ensure its effectiveness. Therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Education, after careful consideration and evaluation of the information, data, and recommendations before it. Number one, Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education hereby authorizes the district treasurer to make any and all payments as are necessary to effectuate the terms of what follows as required by Ohio Revised Code 5502.703C2. Number two, the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education hereby authorizes the creation of an Active Shooter Response Team Implementation Committee. All members of this implementation committee shall be appointed by the BSS Board of Education. At minimum, the implementation committee will include the chiefs of police from the city of Bellbrook and Sugarcreek Township, or a law enforcement officer that each designated. At least one, but not more than two members of the BSS Board of Education and the BSS superintendent. This implementation committee will meet as needed and no fewer than one time per academic year to recommend for approval by the Board of Education the implementation details necessary to successfully execute the following. Number three, the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education hereby authorizes the creation of a highly vetted and highly trained volunteer active shooter response team. Active shooter response team volunteers must choose to submit a voluntary application, choose to interview, pass a mental health screening similar to what law enforcement candidates undergo, annually pass a thorough criminal background check, possess a valid Ohio concealed handgun license, sign a non-disclosure agreement, complete a total of 40 hours of training, complete a total of 40 hours of training, which exceeds the 24 hours required by the state of Ohio, and matches the amount of firearm training required to serve as an armed court officer, bailiff, or probation officer in the state of Ohio. These 40 hours must consist of 24 hours of curriculum that satisfy the state of Ohio pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 5502.703 and 16 additional hours approved by the BSS Board of Education. Annually complete, beginning in the volunteer year of service, 8 hours of pre-qualification training that satisfy the state of Ohio pursuant to ORC 5502.703 and annually pass the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy, or OPATA, live fire qualification test that every law enforcement officer in Ohio must pass in order to re-qualify with their firearm. Only upon completion of all these requirements, and after receiving written authorization from the BSS Board of Education, may an active shooter response team volunteer have access to firearms within a Bellbrook-Sugarcreek school safety zone for the defense of the precious lives of our staff and children.
Okay, can we go through this maybe segment by?
Yeah, I mean,
You wanna-
I'm moving this, and like,
Making a
we're looking
motion?
at second thoughts. So I will second.
So you're making that as a motion? Okay, so the motion is from Mr. Kinsey, and the second is from Mr. Price?
No, absolutely, yeah, we need to tear this apart, make it better, look at line by line.
Yeah, I'd like to go segment by segment. Um,
Let me have some overall discussion first, too.
Yeah,
I've been uncharacteristically quiet tonight. This is incredibly difficult to talking about an issue. Just as it's difficult every time you hear something like this happening. It strikes me, Mr. Chair, I see you speaking up, and probably for the presentation this evening, I sympathize, empathize, recognize the points you made most. I've said this before, both of my parents are teachers. One of them actually an administrator. They both taught in the same district for years and years. All of their friends are teachers. I grew up surrounded by teachers. I spent some time talking with them in this, and I want you to know that what a teacher would go through on a day like this is, yes, I worry about what my children would go through on a day like this, but I worry more, but I think more about what a teacher would go through on a day like this, because it's an impossible situation. The statistic that Mr. Atchison threw up earlier about the 22% were ended by school staff, I've not seen that statistic before, but I totally believe it. I don't like the idea of my children going to school and, hugging their teacher or both for that, but I had one son that still hugs his teachers. And, feeling a weapon on their hip is not something that feels great to me. I also know that I have two parents that if that day happened and there were gunshots in that school, I have one parent who will do this and would hunker down with students. And I have another parent who, especially if he did not have children in district charge, would have gone to war. And I know that. He would have gone to war. And no one would have asked him to, and I don't want to ask anyone to. But at the same time, I know there are teachers, custodians, aides, administrators, nurses in our buildings that maybe few, I don't know, but some would go towards it. And I don't like them, thinking of them having to go towards it. But I don't like my kid having an adult in school with a gun on their head either. So I'm sorry that perhaps teachers aren't feeling recognized here, and I think what Mike just threw out, I think is very specific in its wording, in that it's directing an implementation committee to be established. Our school board policy that's already in place already provides for other designated staff employed by the board who are qualified under state law to carry a weapon in a safety zone. Our policies already provide this. So I would perhaps I'll say more later as we go through, but I do want you to know that I hear you and all the teachers here and all the teachers that undoubtedly have, this has been a topic of conversation every lunchroom. That you are concerned. Those teachers at Uvalde, and I'm not saying that this is what would happen here, and I know for a fact that it's not, always not what would happen here on that day, but I think about those teachers and how long that must have took just to wait. And I don't want you all to just have to wait. But again, I don't want to ask you to run towards it either. I just want someone. So I'll leave it at that for now. I have as I think I'm probably one of the only educators sitting on the board. I was my third year teaching during Columbine, and I was 8 months pregnant when that happened. And the next day, how it changed me, I looked at my students differently. I said, "Are you a threat?" It was hard to go into that room. What was even harder was to hear the principal say, "You are the only difference between your child, your student, and that person that's threatening to hurt." And I know probably I now have a child in every building. And I know I'm sitting here looking at every person in this room that's a teacher in our district, every principal, every teacher would step in front of that shooter. I know you would. And it's not fair to ask you to do that and not go home to your family. That's not fair. I would never force anyone to carry because I would personally not be able to do that as a teacher. And I respect the people that can. I would never be able to take the life of one of my students. But I also need you guys to go home to your families. I need my children to go home to me, and I need you guys to go home to your families. And if this is a way we can do it safely, I am not going to be influenced by any political group. I am approaching it, you can believe it or not, but I do not, I don't take influence for any political group. I am speaking solely as a teacher who was in a classroom with nothing but my body to shield those kids. So that's where I'm coming from, and it's a really hard place this is an excruciating decision. Nobody up here, I don't think, has taken this lightly whatsoever. The only thing, Mr. Kenzie, that I would ask is that somewhere in here, when we have the implementation of this committee, is that we have some sort of, whether it's SEA or teacher representation, a principal, someone to join us on this committee. If we could, if anyone would be willing to add that, I think it would go a long way in this and buy-in.
Because I've rolled this over my head, it's been a topic in the news for years on end, right? You hear Army teachers, and my initial, and I would even say continuing position on that is no. And it goes along with what you were talking about. I don't want a kid to hug a teacher and they feel a gun. I was never for that, and I'm still not for that. So my question to you, Mr. Kinsey, is what you wrote here. Again, I am not for a teacher having a gun on their person in the classroom. That just doesn't resonate with me in any sense. The bigger picture, though, of teachers having access, I respond just equally to the opposite pole with that is how can we not? Because we're like, well, is it preferable to do nothing or to do something? And what I'd also advocate, observe, at least I believe, is that the deterrence factor of the evil person, knowing in my ideal world here that we have an SRO in place in each school. And complementary to that, we have a volunteer team within the school that would join with that SRO. To me, that would be, pretty
pretty strong deterrent. That they can look, unfortunately, to another school, and maybe make other decisions, and God forbid, that's the way these people think, right? So their goal, Lon, you can correct me on this, they want to kill as many people as they can. Often, they assume they're going to half of them kill themselves. I think the statistics got there. But before that, they want to kill as many people as they can, as quickly as they can. So if they're facing the school as SRO, and they can't figure out other team there. In my worldview, I have to think that's a deterrent for the planners. I'm what we're most worried about. I remember you saying that what we're most worried about is number 4, people that are planning. And when they look at the school, ideal world, hopefully we'll see how it goes here. But Bellbrook, there's an SRO in place. That's my position on this position of the board. But there's this team in place to boot. Maybe they just decide that Bellbrook's not the place to try this because they want to kill as many people as they can, children as they can. And they would probably be quite successful if we did nothing at all. Other than, well, I say nothing. But my opening statement, I pointed out the things we have done in the school district and are doing. Secured entries, very smart camera system that will recognize somebody's face and go, no, that person is in flags it. Find the person in the yellow jacket. It's an amazing system. The Vindicator system also getting in. All the other things that are being done. And we have 3 psychologists in our school system. I think we're doing more than on the school system in the state with respect to mental health and other support for that. But when all that fails, as I said in my opening statement, the wolf not only comes to the door, he opens the door. Then what are we going to do? And you see the statistics that we rely upon the police. God bless them; they'll get here as fast as close to the speed of light as they can get. They're not going to be here in time. So to me, it's just compelling. This goes back to you though. I remain very, I would say, opposed to the concept of the teacher in the classroom having a firearm on their person. So
Absolutely. I understand that concern very much. Let me say that I wrote this. Obviously, I really hope somebody has a better idea. I really hope we can improve this, or maybe there's another idea, because I also want to talk about politics. What I think we need to talk about is time, and other people have brought that up. I was heard to hear that. We need to figure out the best way to solve the time problem while our city and township can bust their way here at 120 miles an hour. So with that, I will say that if we were to only think about this in regards to time, and that was it, and that was the only way we would look at this, it's only about seconds and minutes and that time, that time problem is best cut down with having the firearm accessible immediately. Now, in hearing your concerns, in hearing other concerns tonight, and in reading emails we've got this week, I'm agreeing with you that time probably should not be that simple. There needs to be more factors involved. So I'm open to, obviously, whatever amendments or anything you want to do. I agree that time should not be it, but I think it needs to be the most important question.
Yeah, it's a critical factor. You're right. It's not the only factor. Because I completely agree that having a firearm on a person on a regular basis is an unacceptable option. Absolutely unacceptable.
Obviously, some school districts have made that decision to do that.
Yeah.
That's their decision and their community with, their constituents and their school board with their values.
Right.
But I'm just being really upfront and honest here. I am not for a teacher having a gun on their person in the classroom.
Yeah.
And what's going to be really interesting about this discussion, and I hope it takes 6 hours, I'm sure I'll be but, and it'll be interesting as we talk about what if this is beginning the conversation. I absolutely agree with you, Heidi. I want to find a way for all stakeholders to be involved, to provide input, to see what an implementation committee might recommend. Or some of these decisions, maybe, hey, let's wait and see what an implementation committee recommends. Not necessarily this one, I don't know, but there are going to be nuts and bolts and strategic and tactical factors that if we decide to move forward with something like this, be like, hey, that's an implementation committee decision. We wait for them to come back, move the board, ultimately the board decides.
But I think the key word here, if I'm looking, is that active shooter response team volunteers have access. Doesn't say one person. That gives the implementation committee, the strategic guidance, but I think we're not saying only the persons, or you're not saying only the persons.
I'm not specifically saying that. I'll give you as much insight baseball as you want for when I was mulling this over for go on. I've talked to local school districts who successfully implemented teams for many, many years. Two of them, in reviewing their safety plan, and their superintendents who were so gracious with their time and just so generous with talking through a lot of things. I really learned a lot. Two schools I know for sure have multiple tiers of authorization, whereas, for example, based on whatever, if it's training or qualification or whatever, one tier would be, the code to discreetly place very highly secured, impenetrable Fort Knox lockbox. You know the code to that, and that's it. And then there's an additional tier for people with more training, or maybe with a military law enforcement background, whatever the case may be, that they do authorize to carry on their person. So, and we don't have to do either of those. We can do one and not the other, or we let that be an implementation committee kind of a thing, or it's very valid if we want to give an implementation committee guidance right here. We can put more language in this.
I keep going back to times here is that more than weapons access, wherever that happens to be, in my way of thinking, the 99.99% of the value of this is in the deterrence. If someone knows, the planner knows that school has something, I don't know what it is, but I know it's going to complicate my ability to kill as many elementary school kids as I can in 3 minutes, they go elsewhere, or they don't do it at all. Clearly. So I think the deterrence factor. So I think in implementation, clearly there's a lot of complexity to the implementation. However, I think we could and should consider authorization that we advertise. We have authorized, if that's the decision. We have authorized our staff, and not necessarily our teachers. It could be our strike, whatever. We keep them in the dark. That school is known for authorizing protection of their children. Other schools have come out and been very clear they are not going to authorize this. So unfortunately, that's not favorable advertisement for the planner. That's just my thoughts.
Benefit even if you get 0 volunteers.
Yes. Maybe there will be 0 volunteers.
Yeah, which makes the SROs that much more important.
Right, for the later approach.
And on that point, I'll say I've been reading a lot of books over the summer. 5, 6, 7 of my last books have been all about looking into the profile of ardent killers and the worst of the worst. It's been a dark and necessary place for me to try to be learning about here in the last few months. Actually, Dr. Bernard, I'm welcome. If you have any insights on this, please let me know later, or other books have. But it appears as if I'm reading those books that notoriety is what these particular monsters seek. So I think your point is well taken, that they're looking for soft targets to try to rack up as high of a body count as possible in order to make a name for themselves and get the respect and notoriety that they seek. that appears to be, from a lot of the literature, what their goal is. So yes, the deterrent factor, I'm an engineer, I absolutely understand the difference between causation and correlation. I absolutely get it. But statistics show that 96.4% of all murder shootings take place in a gun-free zone.
So do we need to be more specific in the language of when we say staff? Do we need to name, like, we're talking, is your intention here like teachers, custodians, lunch ladies, administrators, bus drivers? Like, do we need to spell that out, or what's your intention?
I think I used the word police.
So, so they would cover anyone.
Yes, I specifically do not, I did a control F, there's not the word teacher.
Right, right, and that's what I noticed. I just want to be sure that we're.
Now, from what I'm hearing, I would entertain if we want to add some language, perhaps throwing this out there. We'll make it turn into a result or whatever. The intent or the guidance for the implementation committee would be that no teacher would carry a firearm on their person in classrooms. Something like that. Is the board would like that? Just throw it out.
What if the perpetrator is in a classroom when they respond? I don't want to paint ourselves into a hole where the teacher then is now liable because they went into a classroom where there was an active shooter and takes out that threat. I don't know. I don't know how specific we need to.
Yeah, you're saying, well, and I think words matter, and such a we're about to talk about harming teachers. I think that is sometimes inflammatory, sometimes intentionally inflammatory, and I don't think we're talking about harming teachers. So first of all, the word harming to me, at least, maybe not to the law enforcement. I don't know what the real meaning to police officer armed is, but to the average citizen, armed implies you are carrying a weapon on your person.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I hear armed.
Yep.
I personally am not considering arming teachers in our classrooms. And I think teachers also implies something else when, depending on the scenario, the best person in a particular scenario that you would want to respond might be a teacher that's on a plant level or down a lunchroom, the teacher lunchroom. But more likely is someone who is a counselor, is a custodian, is someone who is not directly charged with the care of a group of students during that incident, right? Mm-hmm. So, no, I don't want to be talking about harming teachers in this conversation. I want to be talking about providing access to a weapon in a deadly shooter, an active shooter situation. Mm-hmm. I don't want that. And I understand what you're saying about time, and fastest time is when it's on your head. Having to move somewhere to retrieve something from somewhere also adds that minute of this is only going to happen in this very specific circumstance. It's not there is just something brought out of hand. It's not that there is this other thing that looks like it could be really dangerous. It is a very specific tool to be used in a very specific situation. And with that said, I don't know if you want to go through this point by point, but in order for me to necessarily agree with this resolution, again, this resolution is already a policy that provides that we can authorize people. This resolution resolves the creation of a committee. Any implementation plan would later have to return to the board for approval.
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
So these are imperative. A list maybe, and there might be more, but as I've been sitting here, there is a list of imperatives for me to support any of this, whether it be this particular resolution or the implementation. Number one is that is 100% volunteer, and by volunteer, I mean no one is encouraged, coerced, even rewarded for their participation. It has to be someone who feels very strongly that this is how they choose to serve. That the weapons are 100% inaccessible to children at all times. And you can even say children and unauthorized people.
Yes.
Yeah.
That we are not focusing our plan on the minimums, that we were doing more than the minimums. This is not based on what is the minimum, but that we're doing this right. The identity of those volunteers should be protected for the effectiveness of the plan itself, but also for their own personal safety protection, as well as the social implication is the wrong word, but I don't want parents accosting their child or asking to have their child leave to another classroom because they know that teacher is on the team. Any training, and this is where I'll be turning to our township partners or city partners, that any training that happens needs to be done in collaboration or in conjunction with our police departments. And if the city or the township cannot or will not participate, which I'm certain that they will, but if they won't, then they'll go. Because this has to be collaborative in nature. That the implementation plan regarding specifics will not be created by us because we are not the experts, but that it will ultimately come down to us to approve because if the bus stops here and we have to own it, but it will be created by a committee of appointed experts on this topic. We do not want to be the politicians that are directing the military what targets they're supposed to strike, and I also don't want to be the school board that's deciding what type of lockbox is the best to secure fire. That's not our role. And that any such plan created would not require classroom teachers or those in direct, at the time, in direct responsibility for children having the charge of direct, that they are at that moment directly responsible for teaching children to those children ever. There should be no plan that says, oh, I'm on the team, I'm a second grade teacher, and that teacher leads the children. Right? Like those are, now there might be more that come into my head, but as I've been sitting here, those are like these are my no good. Any one of these is not like either part of this resolution or it's part of that implementation plan. I will not be able to support it. And I was authorized to have more than else.
Ultimately, you look at what you're demanding as you review the implementation plan, right? So it's impractical to iron all that out, the next 5 minutes, iron it out, for any moment, because it needs to be well thought out, with input from the experts, professionals, etc. My interest is, I'll go back to again, the deterrence. I would like, as is, I think is going to be what I would like to see, but I would like for it to become known that, this school is authorized, staff have access to firearms for the protection of our children. And I think we can use the framework of this resolution to do that. Audrey, you focused on, I think it was a pretty keen observation there when you said that
in your mind that when you heard armed staff, would say, that in your mind that is only person. And so perhaps, in fact, not perhaps, in light of your statement there, as I pondered this, that's how I can read access. That access does not mean armed. In other words, it's sufficient. It gives me what I'm looking for, because in the end, if an implementation plan comes back and says firearms in the teacher, I'm not going to vote for it. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to approve it. And so I am okay with the word here, access, getting me what my interest is here, is to not have firearms on a teacher in a classroom. So, I'm okay with this resolution as is, understanding that ultimately what it becomes is an implementation plan that we have to revisit and ultimately approve. But what I really want to see immediately is Bellbrook's school system is known as a school system that has authorized firearms for the protection of our children.
And and in addition to what you're saying, which you said very well, is that it also does provide clear guidance to an implementation committee that you absolutely must, my whole list of submit a voluntary application, choose to interview, pass a mental health screening, we have to do all those things. Because there's a lot of different ways that a policy could be authorized, and a lot of different schools across the state have done it in different ways. And prior to the Supreme Court decision in House Bill 99, it could be as willy-nilly and as loosey-goosey as they want it to be. And I think that's irresponsible. I would not want to do that. So, yeah, there's 2.5 pages here. I apologize for my length, but providing some guidance to a hypothetical potential implementation committee of these are our thoughts at this time. And again, this is just beginning the conversation. That implementation committee will need to meet, consult experts. It's beginning the conversation, and there will be more to come where we can bring stakeholders in.
Right.
And we can do this right, because I do not want to do it wrong.
And I do like, having read this again, I do like you said, where you said all members of the implementation committee shall be appointed by the BSS Board of Education. That allows us to bring in the administrators, the SEA, and us, we can decide that. So I am fine with the wording as it is right here. So I do appreciate that that's included.
I just said struck something in my mind toward the end. We'll talk about the hours of training. And in line with, I don't want us dictating this plan. I want that committee. That plan, I like the idea of, like the state did, setting a minimum. And you say 40 hours of training and 8 annually for qualification. Maybe wording such like, I don't think this is a better word, but minimum up, because if that committee comes back and says, we developed this curriculum and this is what we really stand by, and we think it's 55 hours of training. Okay. And we're dictating here exactly what those numbers of hours are, and I'm presuming it says here, I get where you came up with it, but it's based on what court officers and bailiffs and parole officers go through. So it wasn't something, I think it's something drew out of thin air, like it has a basis. But if we hear from the police chief and everybody who's setting up this curriculum, what the individuals have to go through, and they say, today it's going to take us 48 hours.
Then we can pass a resolution at that time to make 48 hours.
Yeah, we could change this, or I just want to say to Assure, I don't want you to come back and tell me it's going to take 36. I want you.
Yeah.
I like 40 as people, so that's a point of departure. Okay. But if they feel that that committee really digs in and feels that more is required,
we can pass some amendments.
Yeah.
There's a number of ways that we can do a lot of this, and I'm going to leave that up to the
The parliamentarian meeting. There are 2 ways we can do amendments. The first would be if you'd like to offer a friendly amendment, and if nobody has any objection to it, especially the person who made the motion, we can just with universal consent make that go. If there is an objection, and somebody says, no, I don't like that idea, then it needs a second, and we vote. But would you like to offer a
I would
friendly
like to
amendment?
offer a friendly amendment, I would like to add the word, change the word total in that line to complete a minimum of 40 hours of training.
Okay.
And then later on in that paragraph where it says these 40 hours, it would just say these training hours must consist of the 24 hours of curriculum that the state prescribes, of course, and at least 16 additional hours. And in the following bullet, annually complete beginning and volunteer second-year service, a minimum of 8 hours of requalification training.
Can I repeat that just to make sure I have it right? In the first sentence here, complete a minimum of 40 hours of training. Moving down to the second sentence of that paragraph, these training hours must consist of 24 hours of blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of that paragraph, that satisfying state will hire pursuant to ORC 5502.703 and at least 16 hours, 16 additional hours of reading. And in the next bullet point, annually complete beginning in the volunteer second year of service, a minimum of 8 hours. Is that your amendment? Anybody object to that? I do not.
Nope, that's fine.
Okay. So noted.
Now, when you read it, there were a couple of places where your words didn't exactly match what's written. I made notes of that. And that was on page 2, the third bullet. You used the word new state-of-the-art security cameras, not just state-of-the-art security cameras. Did you mean to include that?
That's fine.
Okay. And I think the word and on that same page, the third whereas, I think you use the word and whereas, which kind of finishes the full sentence.
Okay.
And then at the bottom, page 2, you said pass a mental health screening similar to that of law enforcement officers.
I wrote down here similar, made some changes based on this. Similar to pass a medical health screening, similar to what law enforcement undergoes.
Okay. And those were the only things that I noticed different from the copy versus what you read. And for clarification, for what Mr. Price and Mrs. Dorn, and I'm not sure I heard from you, but I think you're fine with it. The last sentence on page 3, where it says, may an active shooter response team volunteer have access to firearms? I would want to say have access to secured firearms, so that it's spelled out that they aren't just generally available. Yeah.
That's correct.
I don't know if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that's a plan.
I mean, I'm being as friendly as I can be, really.
I'm totally fine with that. I wonder if security means different things to different people, and what exactly does that mean? But I have no objection to it. I mean, and that again, implementation.
Yeah, But I think
I have
that
no objection at all to that guidance.
I think that helps clarify
Yeah,
what.
I get where you're coming from though, because, going back to military training, securing my firearm means that my safety goes on, in different settings.
Oh, yeah. No, I get your point. Is there a different word that's more appropriate?
Securely stored. And I like, you know.
Securely stored firearms.
Yeah.
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 Let's do that. Securely, yeah.
Okay, so what I heard, I'm going to read the whole paragraph. Sorry. Okay. Only upon completion of these requirements and after receiving written authorization, the DSS Board of Education may an active shooter response team volunteer have access to securely stored firearms within a Bellbrook-Sugarcreek school safety zone for the defense of the precious lives of our staff and children.
Yes.
Yes.
Assuming this passes, again, I'll go back to the 15th time deterrence. I would want to see signs go up immediately, very visible on the schools, so that anybody approaching that school knows what we assume passes every year tonight. Implementation is a different thing, but authorization is not.
Regarding throws, I think it's important that we've got a discussion tonight with talking about those things, because I think that doing one, not the other, or that they are very much intertwined, so it's very hard to discuss one without the other. That said, additional SROs or additional police presence or additional security is not addressed in here, and I'm okay with that in the sense that we have a meeting scheduled in a week and a half, right? And I don't want to require something that the city or township cannot. Just because we can pay for officers doesn't mean that the city and township can manifest them. But I also, I want to go to that meeting saying, hey, we're doing everything we can. We are help. And I say that to watching it. We're doing everything that we can. And we need your help. So,
Well,
that's the spirit that I want to go to that meeting with.
yeah, I would concur with that. I'm just concerned that if we say we've authorized this at this point in time, and have the city or township, and I'm not trying to paint them in any poor light, but we might say, well, you've already done your part, and good luck, because you've already authorized that you can have volunteers, and they should be able to handle it. And I don't think that that's the case.
We can't even implement this.
Oh, yeah.
Without their participation. So if they tell us to pound sand, then.
I don't want to assume a poker game with them.
No.
I think we have, they're here, they have an interest in what we're doing. I doubt very much they're going to go out and say, hey, they're doing that, so we don't have to consider the other. That's my opinion. I mean, they can speak to it next week if we got for whatever. I would want to darn sure be certain I'm going to be advocating resolutions or whatever that I want SROs in each of our schools. And I think I can argue, passionately as to why both were needed. The reason for
this is just coming in just one person about that opinion, just common sense dictates that, you know, and statistics, and evidence-based practice that we hear so much about, whatever. So it's just logical that it's a combination is going to be more powerful than either one by itself. That said, you know, if the township and the city agree to this, it's not like it's going to be in place next week.
That's right. It's going to take
Take
time.
You know, they may have an idea of some, you know, different ways of funding it or whatever. That may be a process. But again, dead horse here. But a sign on the school is effective immediately to send them a signal that the school system takes it seriously, and that crosses a piece of paper and some ink. And I want to see that immediately, assuming this voted on and passes.
I think we're in a really lucky place. I don't know, lucky, but I think we're in a blessed place. I don't know how common it is or not, that we have really great relationships with our township and city partners. You know, Chief Carmen, Chief Brown, been very gracious with their time, presenting some information to us in executive session. Thank them for that. Yeah, certainly, I don't get a sense at all that there's an adversarial relationship.
No, I'm not saying that. No, I'm not saying that.
I'm very encouraged and optimistic that we'll be able to put our heads together and at least explore options and see what's available and what's not. Because I'm with you, I'm going to do everything we can to get an SRO in every building. It's just, in my thinking, this is what we can do now. And if many experts agree that a hybrid approach is best, this is what we can do now.
All right, other questions or comments? Is this something we want to vote on now?
Unless somebody is.
That's what follows it.
Has been motion and seconded. Okay, so we'll call the question. Mr. Lyman, please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson.
Yes.
Motion passes. All right. Are there any other items for discussion or information?
The speed zone systems are, I think, sort of working now. They really tried hard to get them out there before school started about a week late, and they ran into some unprecedented technical problems with them. I talked to the Green County road department today. They're out there seriously working on them, and they think they figured it out. You know, I don't know, there's some cross wires or something in the factory, but they are really seriously taking it to heart. I really want to thank them profusely. Just again, it's a layered approach for everything with respect to safety, right? So this can only help raise awareness. I was surprised, Cheryl Mill does the morning and afternoon crossing here. And again, it's just as important on Upper Bellbrook. The one I typically have most interaction with is Cheryl here. And she sent me numbers this morning, I guess. And there are more kids walking to school than I would have thought right now. And they're actually about twice as many in the afternoon as there is in the morning. And the times I've gone out there with her, or when she couldn't be there and I substituted for whatever, the afternoon's actually worse. I think maybe in the back of people's minds in the morning, at least, you know, there's some awareness there may be kids out there. But in the afternoon, people just go blasting through there. So I have to think the speed zone system is going to help. We can look at other things in the future. But I'm really deeply grateful to Green County for teaming up with us to find a solution there. And hopefully we'll see more of the next couple. Look tomorrow. I think at least one of things working. But they're no longer covered up with plastic bags. So that's a good start.
I traveled that segment several times today during school time and not, and then again. And the speed, telling you what your speed was, worked all the time. And then the lights were flashing during the appropriate time. So from my perspective, It worked great. So, yeah. No, not during the hours. Actually, not during the other time either, but it did make me slow down.
Just another note, maybe you will receive it right, but as a reminder tomorrow, you're all familiar with the Supportive Peers program.
Mhm.
Presentations tomorrow is Supportive Peers and football game. The board is all invited to bring the family out, and members of the community are all invited as well to come out and see what Supportive Peers is about. In the area between the football field and the parking lot near the baseball fields, Supportive Peers will be out there tomorrow prior to the football game, and we'll be out on the field shaking hands as the football team runs onto the field tomorrow night. So.
Oh, nice.
They gather about 6 days or so, or what?
5:45, I think, is when the games are.
Okay.
Sorry. You know this. I just learned about it.
Anything else, board members? To those of you who stuck with us the whole way through this evening, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for very much for your input to this process. As you can see, we've been trying to get information from a variety of resources. We have wrestled with this individually, certainly for quite a while, and appreciate very much the candid feedback that we get from you. More to come on this, of course, but thank you. Thank you very much for your input, for being here, for staying until 10:18 at night. Is there anything else from the board? Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Mrs. Anderson?
Second.
Mrs. Dorn? Any opposition? Let's call the question. Mr. Lyman, please call the roll. Too late.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mr. Kinsey?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes. Motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much for being here.
Sorry?